Chapter 15:14. The man could not openly criticize his wife, so he pretended that nothing had happened. He continued, as for the famous butcher, even though he left Jinzhou for more than 20 years and died in Beiliang, people in Jinzhou still talk about him with relish. The first decade was the most lively. It was said that many powerful families in the Central Plains who had irreconcilable enmity with Butcher did not dare to go to Beiliang for revenge, so they thought about digging up the ancestral grave of the Su family. If our king of Jiaodong had not been on good terms with Butcher, I'm afraid he would have been killed. In my opinion, our king of Jiaodong was also implicated by Butcher. Otherwise, with his ability, he would not be in such a bleak situation now. Last time you said that Zhao Ying, the Duke of Huainan, also died heroically in battle. Our king is not comparable to Butcher and the king of Yen, but compared to the Duke of Huainan and the new king of Jing'an, he is more than enough, right? Otherwise, he would not be able to sit on the position of the king of Jiaodong. Besides Beiliang, only the vassal territories here face to face with the barbarians of Beimang, right? If the late emperor did not trust our king's ability, he would not dare to make such an arrangement. Yu Groom nodded. The late emperor of Liang had painstakingly placed Zhao Ying in Huainan Dao, which was right under his nose. He banished the ambitious Zhao Bing to Nanjiang. He let his brother Zhao Yi, who had the same father and mother, govern the richest Guangling Dao. The king of Jing'an, who was the most unruly, was placed in Xiangfan Qingzhou, which was surrounded by enemies. Only Su Xiao and Zhao Sui were placed in the two places of Beijiang. The middle-aged man, who was neither a scholar nor a scholar, had unwittingly drunk 2 bowls of wine. Originally, he could only hold this much alcohol, but perhaps it was because 1,000 cups were not enough for a bosom friend. He poured himself another bowl. His wife could not stop him. He raised the bowl and smelled it, but did not drink. He raised his head and looked at Yu Groom opposite him. His eyes were a little unfocused. This middle-aged man, who was far away from the smoke of war and the court, seemed to be talking to himself. The Dongyue where my ancestors were in was destroyed by General Gu Jiantang. Perhaps it was not the work of Rintu's day. My grandfather had never had any ill feelings towards Rintu, and I am no exception. I heard that Tai and City was the place where people scolded Rintu the most in the world. Then it was Guangling Dao, which was known as the talented scholar, followed by Jiangnan, where there were countless distinguished scholars. Now, even the new king of Liang is being scolded together. It seems that the more they scold, the more powerful they get. One of them is the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. I heard that he is from Beiliang. Hey, so I really want to understand one thing. Since those people have all become officials of the Liang imperial court, many of them have not even seen Rintu and the new king of Liang. Even the rise of their families can be attributed to Rintu's victory. Younger brother you have seen a lot. Looking at your temperament, I think you are also a well-read person. Can you help me clear up my doubts? Groom Yu hesitated and smiled. Pick up the bowl to eat. Put down the chopsticks to curse. The middle-aged man sighed. Yes, a country without a hero is like a house without a pillar, a person without a backbone. The man drank a big mouthful of the 3rd bowl of wine and was really drunk. He fell asleep under the care of his wife. He muttered to himself that if the new Liang prince couldn't defend the northwest, he would also curse, including the young king's father. The middle-aged man's wife didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She nagged. Do you really think you are a high official? I don't see you working so hard on the crops all these years. Although the woman was nagging, she lowered her head to look at her man's face, which was much rougher than when he was young. Her slightly tanned face couldn't help but reveal a smile. She thought to herself, who asked you to be so handsome? Back then, I had to fight with many women to get you. Even if your farming is sloppy, it doesn't matter. After hearing that, Groom Yu suddenly drank a bowl of wine and said indifferently, a country without a hero. How sad. A country that has heroes but doesn't know how to respect them. How sad is that? Groom Yu got off the Kong and brought a small stool with the little girl to sit outside the room. He turned his head to look at her, who was in a daze, and said with a smile, how about we go somewhere else to find your Grandpa Gao's disciple? The little girl turned her head and rolled her eyes. If you want to go to Beiliang, just say it. I don't really care. Groom Yu was a little embarrassed. He was about to say something when the little girl said seriously, "Go, go. I miss Uncle Lou anyway." This Uncle Lou, when he was still in Wu Wu City, he didn't know how to take care of himself. "I don't feel at ease with him away." Groomyu rubbed her little head and smiled. Yes, yes. Uncle Lou, Uncle Gong, and your Aunt Lin, they can't do without you." She hurriedly shushed him. "You have to call her Sister Lin. If you call her Aunt Lin, she'll get angry." Groomyu laughed. "No wonder Master said you're not afraid of anything except the forest crows." The little girl suddenly sighed and said earnestly to Groomyu, "Xiao Yu, let's make a deal first. When we reach Bailiang, let's not fight and talk nicely. Okay?" Groomyu pretended to be surprised. "Eh? Who said we shouldn't quarrel if we can use our fists?" The little girl raised her chin and said fiercely, "I haven't said the second half of my sentence. When it's time to quarrel, we should discuss things properly. Those who use their fists aren't heroes." Groomyu narrowed his eyes and said softly, "If you travel the Jianghu in the future, you'll definitely become a heavenly heroine." The little girl nodded vigorously and then put her head on Groomyu's knee. She said in a muffled voice, "Xiao Yu, I've wanted to go to Bailiang for a long time. I want to visit the place where Grandpa Gao passed away." Groomyu nodded lightly and didn't say anything. The little girl raised her head slightly. There were still traces of tears, but there was a smile on her face. Xiao Yu, Bailiang is in the northwest. Then won't we be eating the northwest wind every day?" Groomyu smiled. "Yes, there are battlefields everywhere. We might have to eat a lot of sand." It was not easy to be an official in the capital. Even though Fan Zhongho, who had been bestowed the title of the #1 national chess player of the dynasty by the emperor, had become a new noble in the Hanlin Academy, he couldn't help but sigh. The Fan family could be said to be a scholarly family. However, in Xiangzhou it was not considered a luxurious family. When he was summoned to the capital, he went north alone. He didn't bring any servants with him. He had about 700 to 800 taels of silver on him. He thought that even if he couldn't be extravagant in the capital, he wouldn't be too shabby. He didn't think that when he actually became an official in the capital, he would realize how expensive it was. After all, Fan Zhongho had never received the special honor of being conferred by the emperor, and he wasn't a true scholar in the imperial examinations. He didn't have a master room in Tai and City to rely on, and he didn't have the financial support of his fellow countrymen. However, for officials in the capital, especially Huang Menlang of the Hanlin Academy, their residences had to match the prestige of the official system. Thus, Fan Zhongho gritted his teeth and rented the old residence of an old assistant minister of the Ministry of Works. It could barely be considered a place with a pavilion, a garden, and lush greenery. However, this cost him 200 taels of silver. That was the price the old assistant minister gave him for the sake of Huang Menlang. If it were any other official, not to mention 200 taels of silver, even 400 taels of silver wouldn't be enough. The Liang imperial court did not take care of everything in the matter of official uniforms. Other than a few sets of official uniforms that were set by the Ministry of Rights, the rest had to be provided by the officials themselves. The purchase of a wide variety of official uniforms was another large expense. Fan Zhongho had only learned after working for a period of time in the Hanlin Academy that many old-fashioned old Hanlin scholars who did not know how to make money were so poor that they had to borrow official uniforms all year round. To make matters worse, Fan Zhongho, as a newly popular person in the great and city officialdom, had to attend a variety of banquets and weddings and funerals of his colleagues. This caused this young man to spend money like water. Adding on the dignity of the Hanlin Academy, the ink and paper that he needed for his daily study, he had all kinds of connections. Fortunately, when Fan Zhongho went to the capital, he had brought with him about 20 unique and rare books that had been engraved. Many of his colleagues in the Hanlin Academy loved books to the point that they would borrow money to buy books even if they were poor. After receiving this gift, Fan Zhongho started to gain a foothold in the Hanlin Academy. He also promised many of the officials in the capital that he would buy the locally engraved and large books in his hometown that were relatively cheap. This gave Fan Zhongho a good impression. In reality, the purchase was just an excuse. He was giving away his treasures from the library at home. He believed that those old foxes who had cultivated for half their lives in the government knew this, but neither side said it out loud. Most of the officials from outside the capital lived in the southeast area of the city. The scenery here was not bad. Scholars from the south like Fan Zhongho all had to enter the capital through this area. Therefore, those prominent officials from Liang, even though they had been given positions in the court of the inner city, still had their own residences here. It was convenient for them to guide their descendants. Most of the recitation gatherings in Great and City were held here. From spring to summer it was close to the Mang seed. There was an old saying that spring fought for the sun and summer fought for the time. In the past it was always the Mang seed time. Large numbers of scholars and refined scholars would hold gatherings near the Shinran Pavilion. What was interesting was that some family was so large that they had specially set up 20 or so mu of rice fields that were not easily seen in the north for people to enjoy. In the summer, every night, there would be frogs croaking. This year's Shinran Pavilion gathering was especially interesting. It was unknown if those old officials had a tacit understanding. From Secretary of the Secretariat Qi Yanglong to Tantanan of Menxia Province, to Zhao Yuling and Yin Maochun who had risen in the eternal Hui Spring, none of them participated this year. But from Chen Wang, Yan Jieshi, Jin Lanting, Li Jifu, Gao Tingshu, Sun Yin, and the others, these young people with the greatest reputation in Great and City, almost none of them were absent. They all attended this Shinran Pavilion gathering. Fan Zhongho, who had risen in fame, was also present. This gathering of people did not strictly have an initiator. They just called their friends and brought them along. The Shinran Pavilion became unprecedentedly lively. Chapter 15:15. At that time, Fan Zhongho and the youth from the Imperial Astronomer had a discussion in front of the Emperor and Empress. In the end, 6 people stayed until the end. Among them, Chun Wang and the Zhuangyuan Li Jifu had a good chat. The imperial brother-in-law Yen Qiji chatted with Song Kelly, and he, Fan Zhongho, got along well with the crazy son Yin on chess. Interestingly, his experience in the bureaucracy of the capital followed this trend. Li Jifu was often an honored guest of the Chen Manor, and in the Hanlin Academy, Yen Qiji and the young phoenix of the Song family studied history together. It was said that they got along very well. Although Fan Zhongho and Sun Yin were not close friends, they would occasionally talk about the state of the world. Today, Fan Zhongho met with Sun Yin and then went to the Shinran Pavilion together. In Great Peace City, many officials would laugh and say, "High officials ride thin horses and don't show off their wealth." But Sun Yin, who had been banished, was different. He openly bought a tall horse from Bailiang and rode this horse to and fro every court meeting and when he was on duty. It was very eye-catching. Today, Fan Zhongho had the good fortune to ride a horse with the wind. He rode the same horse with Sun Yin. When they arrived near the Shinran Pavilion, where there were many carriages and tourists, Fan Zhongho flipped off the horse and couldn't help but rub his butt. Sun Yin, this guy really rode in Great Peace City. Fan Zhongho was going to suffer. When Sun Yin saw Fan Zhongho's sorry state, he gloated. They arrived at the Shinran Pavilion one after the other in an inconspicuous carriage. 2 men wearing simple but elegant green robes stepped out. Sun Yin saw that they were Chun Wang, the assistant of the left scattered cavalry, and Li Jifu, the Zhuangyuan scholar. He originally thought that, according to Sun Yin's noble nature, he would at most give them a sidelong glance and then ignore them. Unexpectedly, Sun Yin actually took the initiative to pull him forward. Li Jifu, who also saw the 2 of them, obviously did not expect Sun Yin to greet them. He could not conceal the incredulity in his eyes. On the other hand, Chun Xiaobao, who was the most successful official in the entire Liang dynasty, whose official career was comparable to that of Jin Saburo, did not show the slightest bit of surprise. He warmly smiled at them and said, "Brother Sun, Mr. Yuetian, let me make it clear in advance that I still won't drink today. I can only use tea as a substitute for wine." Sun Yin coldly snorted and said, "So what if you drink tea? I'll drink wine. Let's each have a cup. I can still make the assistant go to the toilet for 5, 6, or 7 times." Chun Wang bitterly smiled and cupped his fists to beg for mercy. "Brother Sun, please don't bully a fellow countryman. I implore Brother Sun to point the spearhead at Jifu." Otherwise, Mr. Yuetian is also fine. Fan Zhongho smiled and said, Assistant Minister, you can't just rely on your high official status to divert trouble to someone else. It will damage the reputation of the court. Li Jifu looked at the three people who were talking without restraint and felt a little envious. Although he had many private gatherings with the assistant minister, who was both a relative of the emperor and an important official of the court, he had never really let loose. Every time he returned home from a gathering, he would even think carefully about whether there was something wrong with his words, or if there was something wrong with his words, or if he had been rude. It was no wonder that Li Jifu was worried about personal gains and losses. Everyone knew that Chen Xiaobao, who was the #1 official of the emperor, would soon have a place in the small court meeting. Moreover, compared to other officials in the capital, Li Jifu knew more reliable insider information. The secretariat of the Liang Imperial Court had been empty for decades. After Qi Yanglong took over, it could be said that there were many things waiting to be done. Chen Wang, who was the assistant minister of the left scattered cavalry in Menxia province, although he was already a third-rank official, it was very likely that he would be transferred to the secretariat of the secretariat within a year or two and take up the position of assistant minister of the secretariat that no one had yet confirmed. There were many assistant ministers in the 3 provinces and 6 ministries, but the assistant minister of the secretariat was undoubtedly the most important one. It was not that the Hanlin Academy did not have a good title, but it was the trend. However, these rules did not affect Chen Xiaobao. A 30-year-old assistant minister of the secretariat might not be considered shocking in the old Liang dynasty, but Li Jifu dared to say that this was a feat that would never be repeated in the future. Zhao Yuling, Yin Maochun, Jean Lanting, all of them had their eyes fixed on the title of Grand Secretary. However, only Chen Wang was so absent-minded and leisurely strolling. Perhaps many people present at the time did not expect that this gathering at the Shinran Pavilion in the 2nd year of the auspicious era would leave behind many popular and elegant stories in the history of the future. Dong Yuran, who was personally praised by Tantanon as the son of the Dong family has ghosts and gods, whose writing is like a spring breeze, wrote the famous poem Shinran Pavilion. Huang Quan, the young artist who had helped Tantanon make an exception for Qi Yanglong, was personally spread out on rice paper by the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Jean Lanting. After getting drunk, he splashed ink and painted a painting that was hung in the imperial study that day, Drunken 8 Immortals. As for the poem that spread throughout the capital almost overnight, it was started by Sun Yin, followed by Jean Lanting, Yan Qiji, Song Kelly, Chen Wang, Fan Zhongho, and Gao Tingshu, a total of 64 people. Together, they wrote this world-shaking long poem. Of course, on this day, how could the Shinran Pavilion only be filled with handsome heroes and not beautiful women? The 3 most popular courtesans in the capital, each with their own merits, went up the stage one after another. They either danced or sang, especially the woman who had once been on the Rouge list, Li Baisher, who was known as the best in both voice and appearance. Her solo dance could be said to have shocked everyone. What was even more surprising was that, after that day, there was no news of Li Baisher in Great Peace City. She disappeared so decisively, as if she had never been in this world. Afterwards, based on the words she said at the banquet, people guessed that she had fallen in love with an unknown swordsman and wanderer. From then on, they went off to roam the Jianghu together. There was no wind and rain, and the wind naturally dissipated. The people at the banquet didn't leave until late at night. Li Jifu was already drunk to the point of unconsciousness. Chen Wang, the highest-ranking official and the only one who did not drink, wanted to personally take Li Jifu away, but was urged to stay. He really couldn't leave and could only ask someone to take Li Jifu back. That person was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Jean Lanting. He personally helped Li Jifu back to the carriage with Gao Tingshu. Sun Yin also left late. He came with 2 people but left alone, as if there was no one around. He rode his horse wildly, smelling of alcohol, and shocked many of the graceful ladies of the large families in the capital. Under the crowd's instigation, Fan Zhongho and Wu Congxian had another battle of who's first and who's last. Both sides played their best moves one after another. Although Wu Congxian lost the game, he didn't lose his momentum, which made the spectators exclaim in satisfaction. After this game, Wu Congxian vaguely established Fan Zhongho's second place in Liang's Go. Yan Qiji, Song Kelly, and that fellow villager nicknamed Kong Wu Chi left together. Shinran Pavilion, Drunken 8 Immortals, and Heroes Travel to the Capital were all given to this young relative of the emperor. He would immediately send them to the imperial palace. Deep in the night, the lights were still bright. There were only a dozen people left in Shinran Pavilion. Everyone in the capital knew that Chen Wang, who usually did not touch alcohol, was the last to leave. Fan Zhongho and Wu Congxian had already finished their game of Go. The latter and a group of friends left in high spirits. The people still in the pavilion were all new nobles in the Great Peace City. They were also willing to put down their faces to get close to Chen Wang, a high official in the central government. However, they were all scholars. Even if they drank too much, their chatter and actions did not diminish their scholarly habits. And Chen Wang was never the kind of person who liked to put on airs, so he got along well with them. In the end, it was unknown who was still unsatisfied, so they spent some money to call over a musician who had earned money in this gathering. The woman held a pipa in her arms and did not wear any makeup. Although she was not a national beauty, under the flickering lights, there was a hint of lovely and moving feeling. She was very timid. It was clear that business at the banquet today was slow, and she did not attract any business. She was not like the other women of the same trade. While they were tired, they had already returned full of money. This woman sat on a small stool prepared outside the pavilion. Before she played the pipa, she quickly glanced at the people sitting on the prayer mats in front of the pavilion. There were more than a dozen people, most of them sitting on the prayer mats on the steps. The steps had different heights. At the highest point sat 2 young men side by side. She could guess that since these people were able to appear in Shinran Pavilion and not far from the pavilion like most of the scholars, then they should be the most important people at the banquet today. They were the true important people of Great Peace City. Even if they were not today, they would be in the future. She was lost in thought for a moment. She was very curious what it would be like if these young masters who were waiting for her pipa played put on their official robes. The young master who had hired her to sing was sitting at the bottom of the steps. He smiled and reminded her in a gentle voice, "Miss, it is time to start." Her pretty face blushed and she appeared slightly nervous. She said softly, "Young master, please wait a moment. Allow this servant to test the sound." Hearing the woman gently twist the strings of the pipa, Fan Zhongho, who had intentionally or unintentionally sat next to Chen Xiaobao, said with a slight smile, "This is the typical technique of the Wu family of Jiangzhou in our Xiangzhou. The lower part is the strength of the upper part. The tone is not high, the rhythm is not rushed, and it is slow. It is not as full as the big bows of the north, but it has its own unique charm. Due to this, the song is also a small tune with the charm of Jiangnan. After drinking too much, it is very comfortable to listen to this song." Chen Wang smiled and nodded. He said softly, "I only learned about the pipa when I came to Jing. In my hometown, there is a saying about the drum on horseback. In the past, I was just a poor scholar and did not go to the border to study. I am ashamed to say that even if I wanted to pretend to be cultured, I would only be a laughingstock. Therefore, in these years I have sensibly not attended banquets and gatherings. Other people say that I am not good at raising wang. That is really flattering me." The name of the song, Daughter's Red, refers to the Jiangnan water, Jiangnan wine, and Jiangnan women. Then he heard the woman's clear and melodious voice reciting the first part of the song. Fan Zhongho was surprised. He smiled and said, "What a coincidence. It refers to the daughter's red wine. My hometown has this custom since ancient times. When a daughter is born, they will bury a jar of wine. When the wine is drunk, it is the day the woman gets married. In addition, there is also the Zhuangyuan red, which is taken out for banquets when the man in the family obtains scholarly honors." Chapter 15-16. Then Fan Zhongho suddenly discovered that Chen Wang seemed to be in a trance. 1 part of the millet fragrance lingers around the beam, 2 parts of the flowing water, the cool weather, 3 parts of the fragrance of apricot flowers. A spring thunder buries a jar. After 18 years, the daughter is red, the daughter smiles, The daughter is delicate. The new wine becomes old wine. The little girl is waiting to wear the red dress. Fan Zhongho closed his eyes and listened to the sound of the pipa and the woman singing. He finally sighed softly. The ending of this song was not as beautiful as the name of the wine. The woman in the song had waited for many years, but still did not meet the young master who was far away. She also did not wear the red dress for another man, and died just like that. According to custom, if the woman in the family died before she was married, then the jar of daughter's red wine would be called huadiao, and would be taken out and drunk. At the end of the song, it was said that the young master had finally returned home. Although he was the top scholar, he could only drink the jar of wine alone at the grave. After Fan Zhongho opened his eyes, he could not see anything strange from Chun Wang's face. The song ended, and the people gradually dispersed. There was no need for Fan Zhongho to ask. Someone had taken the initiative to lend him a fine horse. When Fan Zhongho mounted the horse, he inadvertently turned his head and saw Chun Wang standing outside the pavilion. He seemed to have said something to the little girl singing, and then walked towards the carriage. Fan Zhongho didn't have the slightest intention of probing further. With Chun Wang's well-known conduct and Fan Zhongho's understanding of this Qin Xiaobao, he definitely didn't think that this left-scattered cavalry regular attendant would have the slightest intention of taking advantage of him. Fan Zhongho slowly rode his horse. Back then, he was far away in the Jianghu, and now he was high up in the imperial court. Benevolent teacher, even that Sun Yin wants to be an official. Although I, Fan Zhongho, cannot play your game of spring and autumn, but I will do my best to play my own game of chess well. In the distance, Chun Wang boarded the carriage. Before boarding, he asked the woman holding the peeper a question. He asked her if the young master in the song was better off not returning at all if he returned late. The woman was timid and did not know how to answer. Chun Wang did not mean it, so he bid farewell and left. Chun Wang slumped against the wall of the carriage. Even when he married that noble surnamed Zhao back then, even when his father-in-law was a duke of a county, Chun Wang did not drink at the wedding banquet. For this reason, many of the noble sons of the Zhao clan who attended the wedding had mocked and ridiculed him. However, after so many years, he, Chun Wang, had swept through the various departments of the capital, leaping through the dragon gate time and time again. Not to mention those unaccomplished noble sons. Even those powerful dukes and county kings only dared to sit on equal footing with him. Today, Chun Wang actually brought back a small bottle of wine. Just yesterday, he had received a secret intelligence report verbally. There were only 4 words in the message. Dead. He felt guilty. Beiliang was the one who felt guilty. Already dead. She was just like the pitiful woman in the song who waited from Nuerhong to Huadiao, but did not see anyone. In the south of Jiangnan, it rained every family during the Huang Mei season. In the north of the northwest, the reeds were fluttering. Chun Wang drank the wine one mouthful after another. Silently, he drank without stopping, and his tears flowed without stopping. At the time, Chun Wang's first thought was to vent his anger on that young vassal king, to vent his anger on the entire Beiliang, where he had long had nothing to worry about. Everything he had done these years, apart from the silver back then and the kindness of recognizing his worth, was more because she was in Beiliang. He hoped for Beiliang's stability. In the end, he only hoped for her to be stable. For this reason, he was not afraid of accompanying a monarch was like accompanying a tiger, not afraid of the treacherous clouds of officialdom. This extremely patient man was only afraid that he would talk in his sleep and call out that name. However, in the end, he who could rely on his own words to change the world's copyright, who could persuade the emperor to increase his efforts to restrict the transport of grain, did nothing. On the official road, under the curtain of night, in the carriage, there was a man who might become the second Grand Secretary Zhang of Liang. He was like a child, wailing loudly. If one were to say that the first year of Xiangfu was a year that left the Liang Orthodox faction shocked, but they still had a card up their sleeve, then the second year of Xiangfu was a year where wind and rain covered the sky, making people gradually feel uneasy. In the late spring of this year, under Chao Chongqing's personal leadership, the West Chu rebels' arrogance reached the heavens. King of Jing and Zhao Sun's Qingzhou navy couldn't rescue them in time. the vassal king Zhao Yi's Guangling navy was completely wiped out. This also directly led to the balance of power that Song Li had won with great difficulty in Guangling province being easily broken on the surface of the Guangling River. What was even more worrying was that the most important reinforcements of the southern border's elite army, after the Qingzhou navy, whose battle strength was inferior to Guangling's, had no choice but to avoid them. They could only disembark from a few narrow crossings in the upper reaches of the Guangling River. At the same time, the vassal king Zhao Yi, who had lost all of his naval forces, was defeated like a landslide. Following Xia Shi personally taking charge of the Eastern Front, coordinating with the West Chu Navy down the river, the remnants of Zhao Yi's army could only turtle up in a corner. The territory they seized back from Song Li's hands seemed to have been handed over with both hands. The battle on the river affected the entire body. The southern expedition commander Lu Shengxiang's army had no choice but to stop and defend a few key points in place to prevent West Chu Xia Shishi from leading his troops up north to take advantage of the situation to counterattack. This naturally caused the Liang Imperial Court's original plan of a pincer attack from the north and south to the east and west to surround West Chu's capital to the point that not even a drop of water could trickle through, to become a dream. Fortunately, during this time of turmoil, there was still a gathering at the Shinran Pavilion in the capital. This meant that the people's hearts were still stable. Furthermore, Chun Jibao received the imperial edict and personally led 10,000 elite troops out of Shu. Furthermore, on the two Liaodong fronts and the northern border of Ji Province, the great pillar state Gu Jiantang and the new general of Ji Province, Yuan Tingshan, had won a series of beautiful battles. At noon, on the surface of the Guangling River, several large turreted ships that had recently been changed to flying the flag with the character Jiang on it went against the current. They did not stop at the river outside West Chu's capital, but instead continued to sail up the river. These warships were all seized from Guangling Prince Zhao Yi during the battle on the river. It was funny to say that these few turreted ships, which were supposed to display great power during the battle, were almost undamaged before the change of owners. On one of the towering turreted ships in the middle, there was a group of people leaning against the railing. There was a man with white hair on his temples, wearing a green robe that was the most elegant under the heavens. There was a young woman carrying a purple sword box on her back that was peerless in her generation. There were also military generals clad in armor. Each of them was high-spirited and vigorous, with a strict bearing. There was also a group of civil officials who had temporarily boarded the ship from the capital to enjoy the scenery, chatting and laughing. Among them, there were two young men who were the most eye-catching. If their identities were not taken into consideration, one of them had an ordinary appearance and a reserved bearing. He was only eye-catching because of the position he was standing in. He was standing beside the middle-aged man in green robe, frowning faintly. He was very different from the rest of the military generals and civil officials on the ship. The other young man made everyone's eyes brighten. They could not help but marvel at the fact that there was such a handsome man in the world. Wearing a white robe and a jade belt, he stood against the wind like a god or an immortal, enough to make others feel ashamed of their inferiority. The four people closest to the bow of the ship were Chao Chongqing, Jiang Anai, Xia Shibian, and Song Maolin. At present, Xia Shibian's reputation in the imperial court of Liang was extremely great. Even the common people had heard that an extraordinary genius general had emerged from the rebel army of West Chu. He had the bearing of a soldier of the spring and autumn period, Yi Baikue. As for Song Maolin, although he was a late bloomer in the imperial court of West Chu, he was not inferior to Xia Shibian, who had established brilliant military achievements. The two of them, one in civil and the other in military, were known as the twin jade annulus of Dechu. Because of Song Maolin's outstanding appearance, he was like an immortal banished from the world. In addition to his brilliant literary talent, other than being known as the twin jade annulus of Dechu, he was also known as the Northern Su and the Southern Song dynasty together with the Northwest vassal king. Song Maolin was born into a rich and powerful family, so he was probably a true proud son of heaven. The main pillar of West Chu, Chao Chongqing, whose hair was even more white, suddenly turned his head to Xia Shibian and laughed in a low voice. "What's wrong?" It wasn't easy to chase away Song Li, but in the end, Chun Jibao from the east came to the Qingzhou navy, Wu Zhongshuan from the south, and Lu Shengxiang from the north is also truly in control of military power. Do you think the fierce battle has just begun? Xie Shibian said softly. If General Ko was still here, it would be much better. Chao Chongqing laughed casually. Don't worry about that guy. He has a big temper. Yes, and his heart is not small either. Xie Shibian was silent, as if he was afraid of something taboo. Chao Chongqing sighed. Last year, old Grand Preceptor Sun said that West Chu was a burden to me, Chao Chongqing. Today, I also want to say something to you. It is I, Chao Chongqing, who is a burden to you, my student. Xie Shibian shook his head. Teacher, you must not think this way. I have been a citizen of Dechu for generations. Dechu was born in Xie Shibian, and I am willing to die for it. Chao Chongqing suddenly laughed. There is a young man who should really get to know you. Only then will he know what it means to be a scholar. That guy, back in the day, had a lot of resentment towards the scholars. In Gangnam-do, the first time he saw Tongshi Sword Immortal Liu Baijie, he asked, Teacher, can you sell me a few pounds of benevolence, righteousness, and morals? When he saw me, he did not have a good expression either. Xie Shibian was puzzled. But I have seen Bailiang's various actions. They have established academies within their borders, and are very kind to scholars. The new Prince of Liang does not seem like this kind of person. Chao Chongqing smiled knowingly. Perhaps it is because a man has a burden on his shoulders, so he cannot do as he pleases. No matter what, Su Fengyan is indeed the most interesting young man I have seen in my life. There is no one like him. Afterwards, Chao Zhongqing suddenly laughed to himself and said in self-mockery, Even if I, Chao Zhongqing, praise him like this, Su Fengyan wouldn't feel the slightest bit of honor. After all, he is the #1 vassal king of Liang who commands 300,000 cavalry, and at the same time, he is also a martial arts grandmaster on par with me, Chao Guanzi. So no matter how many good words I say, it can only be considered as mutual appreciation. To be honest, when I first saw that kid a few years ago, I never would have thought that the situation would be like today. If I had known, I would have beaten him up back then. Now that I am talking about it with you, it is easier to brag. Xie Shibian felt a little sad for no reason. Although his teacher was always easy to get along with, he was not such a talkative elder. Chao Chongqing seemed to have seen through Xie Shibian's thoughts. He patted the young man's shoulder and smiled. When young people do young things, it is fine to be frivolous. There is no harm in saying that you are worried about new words. When you are 30, you can do things that are responsible. As for people like me who are old, they should honestly admit that they are old. Occasionally taking advantage of my seniority is one of the few pleasures in life. Chapter 15-17. Xie Shibian forced a smile. Dechu was most proud of Mr. Chao. Would he grow old? Chao Chongqing lowered his voice and said, That guest will secretly come in the evening. You and Song Maolin will stay by my side. You don't have to do anything. Xie Shibian asked worriedly, Why does the current Duke of Yenqing, a saint family with a history of more than 800 years, want to meet you? I don't understand. What else is there to say? Chao Chongqing did not immediately give an answer. Lu Songtao, who became a Buddha in Lantua Mountain, came to him to persuade him to let it go. That Duke of Yenqing should be the same. Kings and officials can decide life and death with a word. Scholars like us are full of hot blood and have nothing to fear. However, if there was someone who could decide whether a person's name would be passed down through the ages or go down in infamy, wouldn't they calm down and think about it carefully? Chao Chongqing looked at the sky and muttered, When one has to let go of one's country, one can only let go. Jianghu can also be let go. But some things can't be let go even if I want to. No matter how much I read and how much I know, it is still the same. Xie Shibian was mentally wandering. If one day he could fight the Bailiang cavalry on the battlefield, he would have no regrets even if he died. But such an opportunity would not appear. Jiang and I walked to a secluded place and looked at the rolling waves of the river alone. Song Maolin hesitated for a moment and came to her side. He said softly, Princess. Jiang and I, who had her back facing this immortal, did not move. She pretended not to hear and let Song Maolin know to leave. Song Maolin smiled bitterly. Princess, I only have one thing to say. I will leave after that. Jiang and I could only turn her head and said calmly, Speak. Song Maolin's voice was warm as he said softly, I can guess where you went and who you met a while ago. I don't dare to say anything. I only hope that you will not take such risks in the future. There are many things in the world that should be done by men. There is no reason for women to help. Jiang and I made an "oh" sound. Unfortunately, she did not say anything else. Song Maolin smiled and left. But in the next moment, Song Maolin was pleasantly surprised. The princess actually called his name. He suppressed the excitement in his heart and slowly turned around. Jiang and I smiled. Someone asked me to pass a message to you. He said that the next time he sees you, he will definitely beat you up, until you can't recognize anyone. Jiang and I felt that he was already very kind. He changed the words father and mother to something that didn't hurt their relationship. Song Maolin's face stiffened as if he was struck by lightning. Poor exiled deity. On the border between Beimang and Liangliao, a group of armored cavalry troops roared past right under the noses of the Liang border's military sentries. The leader was the newest commander of Beimang's Eastern Front. He was a legendary figure who was somewhat similar to the Chunqiu remnant that Hongjia ran north into Beimang, but was also very different. This old man did not settle down in the southern dynasty. Instead, he traveled alone in the grasslands of Beimang. It was similar to how the Taiping emperor traveled in Liang. Although he was almost 50 years old, the armored old man still did not look old. One could vaguely see that he must have been a first-class handsome man when he was young. It was no wonder that, in the past 10 years, he had been involved in many affairs. Even the Beimang palace heard that there was an unknown old man who had seduced many noble ladies. When this guy suddenly became the commander of the Eastern Front, the entire Beimang suddenly realized that it was him. Wang Sui, along with Yi Baikue, Su Shao, and Gu Jiantang, Wang Sui was known as the four great generals of the spring and autumn period. He was the youngest and most unruly prince consort of Dongyue. Unlike Yi Baikue, who was victorious in every battle, he had only lost once. Unlike Su Shao, who was the ultimate winner, he had actually suffered many defeats. Unlike Gu Jiantang, who was suspected of not living up to his name, Wang Sui was truly undefeated on the battlefield he was in. The fall of Dongyue was attributed to the self-destruction of the city by the imperial court of Dongyue. It was Li Yang's plan to sow discord. He removed Wang Sui's commander-in-chief title, and Wang Sui himself gracefully abdicated and disappeared without a trace. After Wang Sui followed Dong Zhuo, Yang Yuanzhan, and Lu Gui as the main general of another front in Beimang. Unlike the three who each had their own personal troops, Wang Sui casually rode an old horse to the border to take up his post. In the mountainous eastern front of Beimang, Wang Sui did not promote or demote anyone boldly, nor did he treat people kindly and drink with the generals. He was like an outsider who had run over to watch a show. He did not care about anything and did not meddle in any military affairs. Every day, Wang Sui narrowed his eyes and strolled blindly among the various armies with his hands behind his back. This made the old forces who were originally uneasy or full of resentment dumbfounded. Then, the generals of Beimang became anxious. You motherf ***, doing nothing all day long. When the time comes, His Majesty will misunderstand that we are working together to ostracize you. If we, the old men, suffer such a great grievance for no reason, who can we find to reason with? Thus, someone suggested to have Wang Sui hold a military parade at the border. At the very least, he would be able to have a taste of being the number one figure in the Eastern Front Army. This would be compensation for this old man's understanding of the situation. Thus, today's scene of all the generals on the Eastern Front of Beimang had come out. However, many of the old generals of Beimang's border army and the older generals glanced at the fellow who was surrounded not far away from them with a cold smile. Wang Sui's awe-inspiring might was just for show. Wang Sui, in addition to the personal guards and elite cavalry that were randomly assembled by various factions, also had the personal attendants of Qiu Jubo de Ru 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 Jubo de Jingchong, as well as 4 to 5 young and strong captains by his side. The Eastern Front of Beimang claimed to have an army of 300,000, but in fact, it was only a little more than 200,000. there were 23 generals. Above them, there were 2 Beimang generals who were not as famous as Lu Gui and Yang Yuanzhan. This could not be helped. In the Southern Dynasty, the Beiliang cavalry could fight each other from afar and fight a few tough battles from time to time. However, on the peaceful Eastern Front, they could only confront the 2 big turtles, Zhao Sui, the prince of Jiaodong, and Gu Jiantang, one after another. There was no military merit to be gained. Now, the situation was even worse. Under the secret instructions of the imperial decree of peace, the Eastern Front could only be defeated again and again. The 2 generals only felt that their old faces had been disgraced. Wang Sui suddenly pulled the reins and stopped his horse. The entire army could only stop their horses. Chapter 15:18. The large-scale cavalry army of 10,000 people suddenly went from advancing rapidly to being completely still in an instant. This made Wang Sui, who was sitting high up on his horse and looking around, click his tongue. However, his sloppy and slippery appearance inevitably made people wonder if this old fellow was really praising them. During this period of time, many Kiliarchs who had seen their commander from a distance were puzzled. Was this old fellow really a top-notch general of the Central Plains like the butcher old Prince Liang? Was he really not a swindler who came from some small corner to eat and drink for free? Did His Imperial Majesty accidentally use the wrong person? Wang Sui turned his head to look at the 2 young generals. With a smug smile, he said, "The military strength of the soldiers of the Central Plains has been declining day by day since the end of the Great Feng Dynasty. In the later stages of the Spring and Autumn War, they were so miserable that Northern Han could match your cavalry in 3 steps. Tragic, truly tragic. If it were up to me, it would be fortunate that Liang obtained the Central Plains. Otherwise, your Beimang would have taken advantage of the chaos to invade the south and unify the world. As for Liang, how did it succeed? Su Zhao's Su family army being able to fight was one thing, but that was not the most important thing. Rather, the existence of Su Xiao and the Su family army set an example for Liang, allowing the generals to understand one thing. Oh, Motherf ****, war could be fought so fiercely, and people could die so easily. Why else would it be said that Buddha strives for a stick of incense and man strives for dignity? As a result, a large number of young and strong generals who dared to fight and die appeared in the Liang dynasty. There was nothing to be done. Even if they could not compare to Su Xiao, they could not be too far off, right? The previous 2 emperors of Liang, without mentioning anything else, had good eyesight. In my early years, I, Wang Sui, fought 4 battles with Su Xiao on the northern border of Dongyue. Of course, I definitely won all of them. Hearing this, several generals in the prime of their lives subconsciously swallowed. When they looked at this old fellow again, they suddenly felt that his stature was very tall and his aura was very strong. The sunlight shone on the old man's armor, dazzling their eyes for a moment. This was someone who had defeated Su Xiao. Moreover, he had won 4 battles in a row. Over the past 20 years, which general in Beimang dared to claim to be a match for the old Prince Liang? General Lu Gui was powerful enough, but he was only considered half a Su Xiao by His Majesty. Wang Sui continued, "Of course, back then I always fought against them with numbers. The greatest disparity in numbers was when I fought against Su Zhao's 600 people with 4,000 people. Over 500 people from Su Zhao's side died. Those generals who had just started to admire the old man almost couldn't help but jump off their horses and curse him." But Wang Sui continued unhurriedly, "If I remember correctly, those 600 old soldiers from Jinzhou are the backbone of Beiliang's 3 old battalions." Everyone was horrified. Wang Sui chuckled. "The greatest disparity in numbers was when I, Wang Sui, had 3,000 people and Su Xiao had 1,900 people. I won with a great victory and only lost 600 people. Su Xiao suffered a crushing defeat and lost his capital again. That was why he had to run to the Ministry of War Yamen in Liang to wait in the rain." Not only were the generals and the Kiliarchs quietly approaching, but even the 2 generals of autumn and winter were listening attentively, their emotions surging. Wang Sui asked and answered his own question. Am I, Wang Sui, really a godlike commander? Among the generals of the spring and autumn period, I probably am. But if anyone thinks that old man, Su Xiao, is useless, then they are gravely mistaken. Su Xiao is the truly powerful one. So what if he loses many battles? He can always win the last battle, and that is enough. When a general leads an army on the battlefield, don't learn from Yi Baikue. You have to learn from Su Xiao. Wang Sui looked around at the faces that weren't too unfamiliar. He chuckled and said, "An army isn't afraid of losing battles or dying people. As long as there is that soul, even a tiger won't fall, let alone an army made up of thousands of soldiers." Wang Sui smiled. "I don't know how many of you here are truly dead set on dying for that old woman. But I know that Beiliang has 300,000 border soldiers who are truly willing to die for those two people." Wang Sui's eyes suddenly sharpened. "After I arrived at the Eastern Front, I've been eating and waiting for death. That's because Wang Sui, don't think much of Gu Jiantang or the Tu Liao defense lines. What I really want to fight is the Beiliang cavalry." Wang Sui suddenly asked in a deep voice, "Who is willing to help me take down Ji province and then go to Yu province to experience Yan Wenwan's infantry?" The generals looked at each other. Wasn't this a clear slap to the face of the king of the southern courtyard, Dong Zhuo? Wasn't this general afraid of angering his majesty and the order of peace? Wang Sui returned to his frivolous appearance. He curled his lips and said, "Looks like no one is willing." If it was a simple and crude method of provocation, these military generals who could become great commanders in northern Mang naturally wouldn't be moved. Even more so wouldn't be so hot-blooded as to run from the Eastern Front to Ji province just because of this old fella's few words. But things were far from that simple. No matter how the Liang court viewed the Battle of Liangmang, Beimang itself was already full of worries. They were all looking forward to someone breaking the deadlock on a certain battlefield. Dong Jubo Wang Jingchong was the first to break the silence. He asked in a deep voice, "Dare I ask, General, what if someone blames you for your crimes after this?" Wang Sui laughed coldly. "Blames my ass. If you're still afraid, then Wang Sui, will say something right here and now. Wang Sui, will bear all the consequences." Wang Sui laughed without the slightest scruple. "Even so, it's not difficult for you guys who don't have balls to take down Ji province, which has lost all its elites. But can you really go challenge Yan Wenwan of Yuzhou? I think it's difficult." Wang Jingchong laughed. "Then this general will have balls for once?" Wang Sui narrowed his eyes and stared at this remnant of the spring and autumn period who had left his homeland at a young age. He said slowly, "This, you can really have them." Qiu Bo de Ru Sherwei also laughed. "Actually, this general's thing is not small. It's just that I don't usually see beautiful women, so I'm too lazy to show off. Since there are people from Ji province and Yuzhou today, then I'll have to show off my weapon." Wang Sui ignored the two Qiu Boda. "There's no need to rush. I'll give you half a day to weigh the pros and cons. If you need to discuss with your elders, then hurry up. After half a day, if you don't want to stay on the Eastern Front, feel free to come find me. All right, don't forget to bring good wine. I know you've hidden a lot of good stuff. In the future, follow me, Wang Sui, and fight with your lives on the line. Give me a few jars of good wine today. If you don't dare, I'll return you to being a great general tomorrow. It won't be difficult for everyone to be promoted." Wang Sui looked to the east and spat heavily. Then the old man turned his horse around and slowly moved forward. He looked in the direction of Beiliang in the distance. "I heard you had nothing better to do than wander around Jianghu. Little Jianghu? So what if you can fight 10,000 people alone? Can you compare to the golden spears and armored horses on the battlefield? Can you compare to the heroic sacrifice of hundreds of thousands of armored men? How can Su Zhao's son be so petty? Su Fengyan, back then, your father was completely defeated by me in Jinzhou. If you're really capable, then come find me to settle the score. If you lose, then obediently accept your fate. If you can win, then this world should belong to you, Su Fengyan." Chapter 15:19. Beiliang's Jianghu had never been so lively before. Under Shenyuan Qingfeng's influence, many Jianghu heroes had rushed north to the border. At this time, Mount Wudong was going to hold a new debate between Buddhism and Taoism. This gave many Jianghu people who didn't want to get involved in Liangmang's battle a way out. They didn't want to get involved in the mess, but they just took a detour to Mount Wudong to watch the fun. They didn't want to annoy the Liang imperial court, right? Everyone knew that the scenery of the 81 peaks was spectacular. Moreover, Ancestor Lu and the immortal Hong Xixiang, who rode a crane to Jiangnan, were both cultivating there. It was good to get some immortal qi. For a time, the number of foreigners pouring into Yu and Liang provinces was as large as carps crossing the river. As the local tyrant of Beiliang, the Fish Dragon Gang not only took the initiative to lead the way for the Jianghu Friends under the leadership of gang leader Lu Nerong, but also took care of all the necessities. Moreover, if someone didn't want to travel with others, they could get a lot of money from the Fish Dragon Gang with their travel pass. As for whether they really went to Mount Wudong, the rich Fish Dragon Gang wouldn't really care if they went to the brothel to get drunk or to have a good meal halfway through the journey. This imperceptibly raised the status of the Fish Dragon Gang in the Central Plains. It was true that the Fish Dragon Gang didn't have many top masters, but it couldn't stop their wealth. If you wanted to live comfortably in Jianghu, didn't you need to rely on your fists and money? Otherwise, did you think you were the handsome king of Beiliang? It was said that before he started practicing martial arts, he used only his face to make more than 10 female heroes who came to Mount Qingliang to seek revenge fall in love at first sight. Since then, they were willing to stay in the Wutangen of the king's mansion as his mistress. The number of martial arts masters could be counted with one hand. The peach blossom sword god Dong Tai was too elusive. The great official Chao Chongqing was not young after all. Tuoba Bodhisattva was a Beimang barbarian who was born unlikable. Therefore, Su Fengyan, who was in his prime and had many magnificent achievements, became the most interesting topic of conversation for the Jianghu people in Liang. The king of Beiliang was full of praises for the king of Beiliang's signature products, especially those shops that sold rouge and face powder. They swore solemnly that Su Fengyan had bought things for his close female friends. What made the young heroes and young masters most indignant was that these shops were obviously deceiving people. But the accompanying female heroes and fairies seemed to have been possessed and bought a lot of extremely expensive bottles and jars from those shops. The key point was that the real spendthrifts who spent money like water were none other than these men who protected the flowers. When the Jianghu in Beiliang was bustling, it happened to be the time when the Beiliang custom of rolling willows was at its peak. The sons of the Beiliang rich families would ride horses and shoot arrows in the countryside or in the martial arts arena. They would hang any object on a tree branch and shoot it down. This was called rolling willows. When the foreign Jianghu men saw that many Beiliang women were also familiar with bows and horses, they were inevitably shocked. They had only heard that the Beiliang people were valiant, but now they were sure that the rumors were true. Most of these Beiliang men and women who were rolling willows tied white hemp silk to their arms. After asking around, they found out that the people of Beiliang would tie hemp silk to their dead relatives within a month after they took off their mourning clothes. This was somewhat similar to how the families in the Central Plains tied colorful silk to their arms in the middle of summer to ward off ghosts and diseases. At the same time, this was also shocking. Could it be that Beiliang had really lost so many people in the battles at Huta City in Liangzhou and Huluku in Yuzhou? Why was it that when they were in the Central Plains, they only heard that the Beiliang frontier army either retreated without a fight or collapsed when faced with the million-strong Beimang army? However, they heard that the two Liao provinces under the command of the great pillar state Gu Jiantang and his son-in-law Yuan Tingshan's Jibei defense line were both filled with victory reports. After entering Beiliang, they saw with their own eyes that other than the Beiliang disciples who were riding and shooting willows that made them feel ashamed of their inferiority, the patrolling cavalry that was transferred from the Beiliang garrison made them feel awe and respect. It was said that these cavalry troops were far weaker than the cavalry troops at the border. If they were really sent out to fight the so-called elite troops in the Central Plains, wouldn't it be like a level 1 expert crushing a level 2 master? When most of the foreign Jianghu men began to climb the mountain or approach Wudong, they heard another two legendary news. The king of Beiliang, Su Fengyan, had led 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry troops to battle outside Huluku. This time, he had broken through the enemy lines outside Huta City and forced the Beimang South Courtyard king, Dong Zhuo, to retreat again and again. As for the infamous Beiliang governor, Chu Lushan, he personally led 8,000 Yuzhou cavalry troops from Huayang Pass to the northeast border of Liuzhou and defeated the Dong family's private army of 30,000. Evil people were hated by everyone, But if this evil person was one of their own, it was actually quite reassuring. Chu Lushan, the evil person who could stop children from crying, was the most suitable person to be placed in Beiliang's border. Not only would he not harm the Central Plains, he could also make the Beimang barbarians worry. In this way, Su Fengyan had become the king of Beiliang. Not to mention other merits, just subduing Fatty Chu and forcing him to stay outside Liangzhou Pass was already a great merit. Su Fengyan, after seeing Chu Lushan and the iron-blooded cavalry, which had suffered heavy casualties, for the sake of this Buddhism and Taoism battle, which was supposed to be held 2 years ago on the devil-slaying platform on Longhu Mountain, Su Fengyan specially rushed from Huayang Pass to the border between Liangzhou and Yuzhou. Of course, he did not come to Wudong Mountain to show off. It was because the spy from Fu Shuifang reported that 2 groups of people were coming to join in the fun. One group was Deng Mao and Yelu Dongchuang, who had followed Luo Yang into Liang. They seemed to have stopped hiding their whereabouts after entering Yuzhou. The other group was even stranger. It was a couple who could be said to be unique in the world. Su Fengyan paid more attention to them than the couple from Huyan Daguan. This was because the man was the white-robed monk, Li Dongxin, who was the abbot of the 2 Zen temples in name. He was also the father of a young girl who had long since decided to become a heroine. The arrival of the white-robed monk greatly justified the debate between Buddhism and Taoism on Little Lotus Peak. Since Li Yufu, the head of Wudong, was not on the mountain, the Taoist who was debating with the Buddhists was a Taoist priest that many people in Beiliang had never heard of. He was a disciple of Song Jiming, and it was rumored that he had just built a monastery on Little Pillar Peak. Not all of Wudong's 81 peaks have a Taoist monastery. Most of the peaks have been raised in seclusion and no one knows of them. Currently, Wudong Mountain only had 12 peaks. Among them, the big and small Lotus Peaks were the most famous. The Jade Pillar Peak, which was known as the Jade Pillar of Internal Strength, was also quite famous. From this, it could be seen that the Taoist priest named Han Gui, who was regarded as someone who could hold his own, must have some skills. In addition, the Green Mountain Monastery had been funded by the king of Beiliang from Mount Qingliang, and the status of Little Pillar Peak had naturally risen. As one of the ancestral courts of Taoism, Wudong Mountain was separated from Mount Longhu and had been fighting for hundreds of years. Of the few immortals of the highest generation, Wang Zhongluo was the first to pass away. Hong Shixiang, whose cultivation had reached Tongxian, was reincarnated for some unknown reason. Sword maniac Wang Xiaoping, who blocked the way Wang Xianji, died heroically on the banks of Guangling River. Song Jiming, who had lived for more than 60 years, had also died. Now, only the enlightened priest Chun Yao and the self-deprecating Yu Xingrui, who had self-deprecated, "I can't cultivate immortality. I can only cultivate strength." The latter was also the person who had the foresight to bring Li Yufu up to Wudong from the East Sea. There were about 20 Wudong Taoists of the same generation as Li Yufu and Han Gui. After that, there were more Taoists of the 4 generations, especially the Ling and Jin generations. Unlike Mount Longhu, which was declining day by day, Wudong Mountain, which had been silent for 100 years, was becoming increasingly prosperous. There were now more than 600 Taoists of the Jin generation, and this was under the premise that Wudong Mountain was not willing to accept disciples indiscriminately. When going up the mountain to burn incense, whether it was the people of Lingzhou or the pilgrims of Ji and He Prefecture, they would usually climb the mountain from the southern divine path, which had the most beautiful scenery and the best route. Su Fengyan had chosen the northern divine path to climb the mountain. He did not expect that he had underestimated the huge appeal of the battle between Buddhism and Taoism. Apart from the 700 to 800 Jianghu people, most of the rich people of Beiliang and the other 3 prefectures had come by car or horse. There were even many people from Huainan and Gangnam-do who had come to burn incense and watch the battle. The northern divine path of Wudong Mountain was not wide to begin with. What was even more unfortunate was that it had started to drizzle early in the morning. The rain was not enough to obstruct the road, but the muddy road was a pain. Coupled with the constant trampling of the people, the rugged road of less than 20 miles was more tiring than 50 miles of the official road. Chapter 1520. This time, Su Fengyan didn't have any retainers following him to Mount Wudong. Because he was in a hurry, he didn't even ride a horse. Instead, he chose a secluded path and flew like a bird, so he didn't look travel-worn. He wore a green robe and had 2 sabers hanging from his waist. One was a soldier that he had stolen from Jiang Fuding, while the other was an ordinary cold saber. At noon, Su Fengyan stopped at a simple and crude restaurant at the entrance to the Northern Divine Road. The name of the restaurant was quite interesting. It was called Passing Village Inn, probably to remind pilgrims who had come from afar that there wouldn't be another shop after passing through this village. The restaurant was already packed with people, all of them hoping to ascend the mountain as soon as possible. Su Fengyan could only sit on a small bamboo stool under the eaves with a dozen or so other people to shelter from the rain. If they wanted to eat hot food or drink hot wine, they had to obediently wait in line. Su Fengyan asked for a pot of tea. The tea was under the banner of Wudong's Taoist tea. For a palm-sized pot of tea, he dared to ask for an exorbitant price of 25 copper coins. Su Fengyan held the pot in one hand and the cup in the other. He drank it all in a few mouthfuls. When he asked the waiter to refill his cup, he had to fork out another 5 copper coins. Obviously, Su Fengyan wasn't the only one who felt that he was being overcharged. The pilgrims around him were also complaining. A few of the younger ones even had a bad impression of Wudong. They said that if a single leaf was like that at the foot of the mountain, then the Wudong Taoist priests on the mountain must be like that as well. From their accents, it was clear that they were all foreigners. Some of the Beiliang pilgrims who often went to the mountain to burn incense frowned. An old man smiled and tried to persuade them. He said that when they went to the mountain to burn incense, even the incense sticks were a gift from Wudong, and they didn't charge a single copper coin. Of course, how much incense money they were willing to pay, whether it was a few copper coins or a few taels, was all up to their ability. The old man also said that since he was young, he would come here to burn incense 3 or 4 times a year, but he had never met a Wudong Taoist who took the initiative to ask him to pay. As soon as the old man opened his mouth, many foreigners who were curious about Wudong Mountain became interested. Some of them asked the old man if he had seen Li Yufu, the leader of Wudong Mountain. The old man laughed and said, "Of course I have. How could I not? Not only Leader Li, but also Leader Wang who broke the river with one finger and Leader Hong who rode a crane to Jiangnan. I have seen them all, especially Leader Hong. I'm not boasting. In fact, there are many pilgrims who have seen these people. If you go up the mountain today, you might meet Jinren Qian or Jinren Yu to interpret the divination for you. Unfortunately, I heard that Headmaster Li went down the mountain to travel. Then is it true that your king of Beiliang once practiced martial arts on Mount Wudong? Of course, I've personally asked 2 Taoists of the Qing generation whom I've been familiar with for many years. It's absolutely true. It's said that our king and Leader Hong have been close friends for a long time. On the mountain, one practiced martial arts and the other practiced Taoism. They trained each other. Their relationship was really good. A young girl from outside asked shyly, "Uncle, is your king of Beiliang really as handsome as the rumors say? How can it be fake? The son of the general and the princess. There's no need to say anything about his appearance. Haha, little girl, you don't have to be shy. There are many girls in Beiliang who want to marry our king." The old man said and pointed at Su Fengyan, who was sitting not far away drinking tea. He joked with the young girl. "Look, our king is guaranteed to be as handsome as this young master." Su Fengyan turned his head and smiled helplessly. The young girl's face was red. Su Fengyan took a sip of tea and gently looked into the distance. Just like the Taoist temple where Han Gui lived on Little Pillar Peak, Green Mountain Temple, and Green Mountain Temple, one's state of mind would be different no matter where one was. On the battlefield, with corpses and bones everywhere, one could not help but feel sorrowful. On the other hand, if one was in the forest, it was inevitable that one would develop a somewhat wild state of mind. After personally experiencing the siege of Huta City, and then welcoming Chu Lushan and his 3,000 cavalry and 5,000 corpses back from the border of Liuzhou, Su Fengyan seemed to hear the sound of fighting even though he was already far away from Huta City and Huayang Pass, far away from the sound of war drums and horse hooves. The more peaceful he was, the harder it was for Su Fengyan to let go. There seemed to be an image in his mind. Beiliang's horse head was facing north. The spearhead was facing north. The blade was facing north. 300,000 soldiers at the border. For the barren land behind them, did not hesitate to die to stop Bei Mang's iron hooves. When Lu Jinu parted, he said there was no need to feel guilty. The 60,000 people in Huta City were not fighting for Su Fengyan, they were dying for Beiliang. It was just that Su Fengyan was worthy enough for them to entrust their lives to and let them know that their deaths were worth it. But could Su Fengyan really not feel guilty? He could not do it. The people under the eaves saw two men coming from afar. One was stocky and the other was short. Because they were not eye-catching, they only glanced at them and did not pay them much attention. Su Fengyan slowly got up and called for the waiter to return the teapot and teacup. Then he stood at the edge of the stairs, right on the line between rain and no rain. When he made this seemingly unintentional move, the two visitors from afar also slowed down. But for the pilgrims under the eaves of the restaurant who were waiting to eat, this kind of peak confrontation between two people who were not in the first class and did not understand the mystery was not noticed at all. Behind Su Fengyan, people were drinking tea, chatting, and resting. They were completely unaware of the turbulent situation that was surging like a tide hitting the city wall. Although the two men slowed down, they still walked toward the restaurant. They seemed to be walking like ordinary people, but in fact, one of them did not even touch the ground and did not touch the mud at all. The younger man seemed to be carrying 1,000 pounds of weight. When he stepped on the ground, even the tops of his shoes sank into the yellow mud. Seeing that they had no intention of stopping, Su Fengyan narrowed his eyes. His right hand pressed on the handle of the soldier crossing the river, and he was about to step on the stairs. The middle-aged man was the first to stop. The young man beside him wanted to continue, but his companion suddenly reached out and stopped him. The young man's face was full of indignation. He stared at the guy and muttered in a low voice in the slightly awkward Mandarin of the Central Plains. "Do you think you're so great just because you fought Old Monster Wong and Tuoba Bodhisattva?" Then the arrogant young man sighed. "Well, you're quite great." He shouted at the top of his voice. "Hey, you know we're not here to fight. How can you treat your guests like this?" Su Fengyan looked at this young man who was considered short even among the men south of Liang's Guangling River, let alone the tall men of the northern lands. His true identity was Yelu Dongchuang, a true and proper member of Northern Mang's noble family. Simply speaking, if that puppet crown prince were to die one day, then this fellow would be the same as Murong Longshui, a member of the royal family with the greatest hope of becoming Northern Mang's next emperor. Because of Jia Jia, Su Fengyan played a game of cat and mouse with Murong Longshui and Old Moth, the leader of Spiderweb. She was quite an interesting woman. For some reason, Yelu Dongchuang swaggered along with Luoyang to Zhulu Mountain. As for the broken spear Deng Mao, whose ranking in Beimang was similar to that of Hong Jingyan, he should be the personal retinue of the former emperor's nephew of Beimang. To be precise, this was the second time Su Fengyan and Yelu Dongchuang met. That was when Gao Shulu woke up after being sealed in the mountain for 400 years. Su Fengyan went on an out-of-body spiritual journey and met with the celestial being. At that time, Yelu Dongchuang, who ran errands for Luoyang, and Su Fengyan barely met each other. Chapter 15:21. Su Fengyan smiled, retracted his steps, and sat back down on the stool. Deng Mao and Yelu Dongbed were finally able to climb up the steps and come under the eaves. It wasn't that Deng Mao didn't have the ability, but since he didn't have the heart to fight to the death, Deng Mao wasn't the kind of person who would look for trouble. As for Yelu Dongbed against the current Su Fengyan, if the latter wanted to make him unable to take a single step closer to the restaurant, he, as a member of the Beimang royal family, really didn't have the ability. The soles of Yelu Dongbed's shoes scraped the edge of the steps, scraping away a thick layer of dirt, before he sat down next to Su Fengyan. Deng Mao didn't sit down, because the restaurant only had one stool available. Yelu Dongbed lowered his voice and asked, "Did you really fight with Tuoba Bodhisattva? What was the result? I want to hear the truth." Su Fengyan said to this overly familiar fellow, "Is Suing well?" Yelu Dongbed was stunned. "Suing? Who?" Su Fengyan finally smiled a little, and said softly, "The girl who likes to wear red robes by Luoyang's side." Yelu Dongbed said, "Oh, she's just like that. In the past, she was neither human nor ghost. Later, she went crazy and cut off her own face. Now she looks like a normal girl, but when she has nothing to do, she still likes to wander around there by herself. That red robe can go around for almost an hour in one breath. Anyways, it makes my eyes dizzy and my heart tired. Su Fengyan didn't say anything. Yelu Dongchuang was startled. What, you like this kind of thing? Su Fengyan didn't turn his head to look at this blabbermouth young man. He only asked indifferently, "You're not afraid of dying here?" Yelu Dongbed rolled his eyes. In the next moment, Yelu Dongbed didn't even dare to breathe loudly. The people under the eaves did not notice that at that moment, the handsome young master with the twin sabers had swayed a little. The middle-aged man with an ordinary appearance had already left the eaves to soak himself in the rain, and then returned to the eaves to stand still. They were just wondering how the man with his back to the restaurant had unknowingly turned to face them. Su Fengyan whispered, "There won't be a next time." Yelu Dongchuang smiled bitterly. "I've only heard that you're quite humorous, and you don't seem like someone who can't take a joke. It seems that as long as a person becomes an expert, he will put on airs." Su Fengyan shook his head and said, "If you change your identity and go there one day, you will know the reason." It wasn't clear whether Yelu Dongbed truly understood or was just pretending to understand. "I understand." Su Fengyan waved his hand and asked the waiter for a pot of tea and 3 cups. The astute waiter glanced at the short man squatting in the latrine and refused with a straight face. He said that he had to buy 2 pots of tea, but he could also lend him a small stool. Su Fengyan smiled and agreed. He directly pinched out a piece of broken silver from his money pouch. It was about 60 copper coins. Besides, in this world, silver was always expensive and copper was cheap. Only then did the waiter grin. This brother, he knew the rules. Later, Deng Mao finally had the opportunity to sit down. If the truth of this spread to the Jianghu, this waiter would probably be the most arrogant man in the world. He haggled with Su Fengyan, the king of Beiliang, rolled his eyes at Yelu Dongbed, and rewarded Deng Mao with a stool. Su Fengyan poured a cup of tea for each of the Beimang men on his left and right. He asked, "What business do you have in Beiliang?" Yelu Dongbed didn't keep him in suspense. "Luo Yang told me to tell you that other than Chao Chongqing and Duke Yensheng, who helped persuade Emperor Liang, there is no need to call off the 3-year agreement." Yelu Dongbed took a sip of the tasteless tea and continued, "Also, I wanted to see you. I wanted to know if there was a possibility that we could do something together." Su Fengyan was a bit absent-minded. He looked at the light curtain of rain outside the eaves and took a deep breath. He calmly said, "Tell me," Yelu Dongbed said self-deprecatingly. "In my family, many relatives around my age have died in recent years. Of course, most of them have the same surname as me. As for that, well, those who have my aunt's surname, most of them are women like that fat girl Morong Longshui. So to tell the truth, I still have a chance. Even if it's not big, it's still there. The reason I snuck out, to tell you the truth, is to avoid that chess and sword music school boss who's making a comeback. There's no other way. That old man was actually chased out of Liang by my grandfather. This time, he's come back for a surprise attack. Of course, it's not as simple as just giving me a hard time. The old man values my older brother more. The reason is that he would find a dog to guard a house, not a wolf cub. I know that the current situation of Liang Mang's stalemate is ultimately the idea of 2 people, the old man and Fatty Dong. Not everyone thinks so." Su Fengyan said with a half-smile, "Show some sincerity, okay?" Yelu Dongbed laughed. His voice was even softer as he slowly said, "At the very least, I know that 6 out of the 8 governors and 12 great generals are firmly against it. As for Helian Wuwei and the others, it's up to them to fight Liang Mang. It's hard to say that they're fence-sitters. In any case, they're just going with the flow. Of course, my parents died a long time ago, but my grandfather is still alive. Although he's not a great general or governor, he's still comparable to a great general and a governor, right?" Su Fengyan was familiar with the inside story of the Beimang royal court. He shook his head and said, "That's not all." Yelu Dongbed turned his head and stared at the side of the young king's face. He asked, "Do you want to do this deal?" Su Fengyan asked back, "Other than wanting me to defeat Dong Zhuo and the governor of Taiping's momentum, what else do you want me to do?" Yelu Dongbed laughed foolishly. First of all, you have to kill Tuoba Bodhisattva. Secondly, you have to do your best to protect the main force of the Hong Jingyan Ruren cavalry on the battlefield. Su Fengyan said mockingly, "You should really go to the battlefield and see. Then you wouldn't have to make it sound so easy." Yelu Dongbed laughed. "If it were anyone else, I wouldn't even mention this, but you can. That's why I'm sitting here today, drinking 20 copper coins for a pot of good tea." Su Fengyan asked, "You want to be the emperor that much?" Yelu Dongbed asked back, "You don't want to?" Su Fengyan laughed it off. Yelu Dongbed quietly waited for him to continue. Su Fengyan finally said, "I can only promise you that we'll take it one step at a time." Yelu Dongbed slapped his thigh. "That's enough." Yelu Dongbed placed the teacup by his feet. As he bent down and stood up, he said softly, "If the two of us can reach that step, I can also promise you one thing. Half of the Southern Dynasty can be considered as me, Yelu Dongbed, returning the money for your tea. Once both sides of Liangmang are done, and if you still have the intention of heading south to the Central Plains, I can even lend you the entire Eastern Front for 3 years. I can help you suppress the Liang border army for 3 years." Su Fengyan watched the two of them leave. The tea had cooled. After Yelu Dongbed and Deng Mao had walked more than 10 li, Yelu Dongbed asked, "Do you think he'll agree?" Deng Mao said expressionlessly, "Why wouldn't he agree? Other than the matter of Hong Jingyan's Ruren cavalry, everything else is something Su Fengyan should do. As long as Dongzhua and the Taiping magistrate are still working together to control the court, Liangmang is a dead end, and the chances of Su Fengyan's Beiliang winning are too small." Yelu Dongbed crossed his arms behind his head and sighed. "That's right. It seems like he can only accompany me in this gamble, and can only help me once. Rather than fighting to the death with my million-strong army without any chance of victory, it's better to do everything in his power to ruin Dongzhua and the Taiping magistrate's reputation. At the very least, it'll be relatively easier. As long as I can force these two fellows to weaken in one spurt of energy, I won't even need to exhaust myself. It'll be equivalent to winning an opportunity for me. When the time comes, it'll depend on my ability and destiny." Deng Mao hesitated for a moment, then asked, "If you really succeed, dividing the world between the north and the south?" The dwarf's lips cracked into a soundless smile, revealing a savagery and bloodthirstiness that had not been seen in the last 20 years of the Yelu surname. And under the eaves of that restaurant, Su Fengyan's lips twitched. Su Fengyan stood up and walked down the steps, beginning to step onto the northern divine path of Mount Wudong. So what if such a person became the emperor of Beimang? Chapter 15:22. The rain gradually stopped and the sun gradually rose. Su Fengyan began to climb the mountain. He passed by Jinlongguan, Nyangzi Slope and Yellow Monkey Ridge, and then passed by Huqiao Mound to Leigong Stream. Su Fengyan saw several groups of pilgrims at Leigong Stream. Most of them were resting on the rocks by the stream, swallowing the snacks they brought with them. After all, the mountain path was muddy, which was the best way to eat people's strength. Among the groups of people, there were some pampered young masters and young ladies who appeared to be extremely tired. A few young women were gently beating their calves, complaining to their companions that the scenery of this Shinto path was too different from the reputation of Mount Wudong. They said that the shabby Taoist temples from before were unbearably narrow. At first glance, it was obvious that it was not a place that could accommodate immortals. Those Taoist masters in the mountain also did not have any sage-like demeanor. As for the moving scenery of Mount Wudong that was like lotus peaks and bamboo shoots, they did not even see a shadow of it. Along the way, the scenery along the way could not be said to be barren and unruly, but it really could not be compared to the beautiful scenery of the Taoist paradise. Su Fengyan picked a relatively secluded place by the stream and sat down. The ancient trees towered into the sky and the shade was dense. Although he did not do anything out of the ordinary, the dual sabers on his waist were actually quite eye-catching, especially for the locals who knew their stuff. When they saw the Beiliang sabers, their eyes became a bit more complicated. Nowadays, in Beiliang, those who secretly carried cold sabers, regardless of their family background, were all arrested and imprisoned. Therefore, Su Fengyan was regarded as a member of the army. This was actually normal. Wudong Lotus Peak was hosting a huge Buddhist debate, so Beiliang's military would certainly arrange for capable people to keep an eye on the situation to prevent negligence. Su Fengyan suddenly looked up and saw a pair of acquaintances walking over together. They were the Taoist master of Qingshan Monastery, Han Gui, with whom he had once discussed Tao on Shaozhu Peak, and his disciple, Qing Xian. Su Fengyan hurriedly got up to greet him. Towards this Taoist priest who was favored by Wang Zhongluo and Hong Shixiang, Su Fengyan had a very good impression of him. He felt that he was fully deserving of being called a person of the mountain. Han Gui wholeheartedly cultivated the Tao. Cultivating the heart was also cultivating the truth. Based on Su Fengyan's status as a vassal king, Zhang Lu Jinren Qinyao or Yu Xingrui should have rushed to the foot of the mountain to personally welcome him, but they still let the junior Taoist priest Han Gui be in charge of this matter. This was probably the unique feature of Wudong Mountain. Not only it did not make people feel neglected, on the contrary, it made people smile. If he was climbing the mountain together with the two elderly Taoist priests, although the ceremony had arrived, other than the longer the mountain path, the more difficult it would be for him to exchange pleasantries. What else could he say? How boring that would be. When Han Gui saw Su Fengyan, he smiled and cupped his fists in the manner of a Taoist welcoming a guest. He did not spoil the mood by calling out his identity. Su Fengyan lightly cupped his fists in return. The young Taoist child Qing Xian, who was not old but had a high seniority, did not get to see Lu Long, who he used to play with on the mountain. His face was full of disappointment. When the heavens obtained Lu Long, the earth obtained Liu Long's peace. When the gods obtained Lu Long, they obtained Lu Long. The old Taoist master Wang Zhongluo and his shidi had the highest seniority, followed by the current Taoist master Li Yufu and Han Gui's generation of Taoist priests. Afterwards, according to the passage in the Taoist Saints' Book, there were 4 generations, Qing Ning and Ling Jin. Therefore, even if the Taoist priests of the Jin generation on the mountain were not young, when they saw Qing Xian, the little Taoist priest of Qingshan Monastery, they still had to call her great-grand martial uncle or great-grand martial uncle. If this little Taoist priest, who was of the same seniority as the direct disciple of the Wudong leader, Yu Fu, would probably be called Little Immortal. Han Gui sat beside Su Fengyan and smiled. The white-robed monks of the Tu Zen Temple have already ascended the mountain from the southern divine path. The current celestial master of the celestial master residence of Longhu Mountain, Zhao Ningxin, and Master Qinglian Baiyu are also on their way. Su Fengyan said with some surprise, "Zhao Ningxin is willing to support and come all the way to Beiliang? I have a big grudge with this Yui minister." Han Gui had never traveled down the mountain. On the mountain, she had always concentrated on learning and did not care about worldly affairs. Therefore, she had never heard of the earth-shattering battle of the immortals on the Spring God Lake. She was not interested in the conflict between the yellow-purple noble, who had the same surname as the emperor, and the young king. She skipped the topic and said softly, "There are no less than 100 famous scholars from the Huainan Dao and Gangnam-do. They are also traveling together and will be climbing the mountain at dusk tonight." Su Fengyan nodded and said with a smile, "Spies have mentioned this. It's really hard for these elegant scholars to stay in Beiliang for half a day." Su Fengyan knew that the 3 people who could make this group of arrogant scholars take the initiative to come to Beiliang were Song Dongming, who was once one of the prime ministers of Liang, Yen Song, who retired at the age of 79 and returned to his hometown, and then came to Wudong with his family to burn incense, and Han Guzi, who led a group of disciples to travel to the border. These 3 people's contributions could not go unnoticed. If they did not take the lead, even if there was the scene of the scholar going to save the country, it would not have moved this group of noble scholars who grew up in the rich land of fish and rice in the Central Plains. Strange things happened. Su Fengyan instantly slid from one side of the stream to the other. Even though he was attacked by such a fierce sneak attack, Su Fengyan still did not have the intention to pull out his saber. The little Taoist child Qing Xian, who only felt a gust of wind raging in his ears, opened his eyes wide and saw a tall woman in a simple and elegant dress beside him and his master. She was young and very beautiful, but her face was too cold. Compared to the time when the old Taoist priest accidentally tasted the food he cooked, her face was much worse. The little Taoist child saw the strange sister squinting her eyes, which were long and slender like the bamboo leaves on the mountain. The pilgrims near the stream were first stunned, but soon there were some quick-tempered busybodies who cheered loudly. In their field of vision, the ripples on the water surface caused by the young man with the saber gradually dissipated. A man and a woman stood opposite each other on both sides of the stream. A handsome man and a beautiful woman, and each of them had the bearing of a master. No matter how they looked at it, there was a story to be told between the two of them. This immediately made the pilgrims who were bored to death on the mountain road excited. They could not wait for the two of them to fight until the mountains collapsed and the earth split. Of course, it would be best for them to reveal their identities and sex before fighting, report their Jianghu nicknames and talk about their love and hatred, and then fight to the death. This way, their trip to Wudong would not be in vain. In fact, Su Fengyan, who took the initiative to back down, asked with a smile, "Didn't you return to Mount Hui?" The woman who was not wearing purple today sneered and said, "If the interest keeps on rolling, it will be too late for me to collect the debt. Even you may not be able to pay it back." Perhaps they felt that the couple was too young and unfamiliar. Even if their martial arts cultivation was good, there was a limit to it. Very soon, some impatient spectators shouted at the top of their lungs, "Fight! Why aren't you fighting? Fight well! Fight well! We'll immediately go back to the Jianghu and say some good words for you too." Some people who did not know what was good for them shouted, "Hurry up! The two of you can't just talk and not fight." The Taoist priest Han Gui sighed softly. He only hoped that if Su Fengyan really fought with the strange woman, he would not be implicated. So at this time he took his disciple and walked into the crowd. It looked like they were taking refuge, but in fact, they were helping to block the disaster. Chapter 15:23. At this time, there were already people who claimed to be from Jianghu talking about it. They explained to the layman that there were 9 levels of martial arts in the world. In the end, they all revolved around the 7 words of skin, flesh, tendons, bones, body, qi, and spirit. Only when one reached the 2nd level of Master Realm could one touch the threshold of qi. For example, when a swordsman reached the 2nd level, he could barely control qi and fly a sword. The handsome young master with the twin sabers at his waist was repelled, sliding from the stream to the other side. However, his calves were not soaked. This clearly showed that he was in the 4th level realm or even the 3rd level realm. It could be assumed that with his age, he was fully deserving of the title of a rising talent in the martial arts world in a province or county. Su Fengyan suddenly smiled and said, "If you want to fight, sure, but we have to make a small deal. As long as you help me find someone, you can choose the time and place. Also, you have the final say on who wins or loses." She hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded. Su Fengyan asked curiously, "You want that title that much?" Su Fengyan knew very well that no matter how many fortuitous encounters the woman in front of him had, due to her innate talent, reaching the great celestial phenomenon realm was already the limit of her martial arts. The martial arts journey of the mistress of Mount Hui's Great Snow Plateau could be said to be soul-stirring. First, she used the treacherous and insidious secret art to absorb other people's qi and turned it into her own, barely reaching the 1st level. If not for Su Fengyan helping to suppress her chaotic qi with the imperial seal of several countries, hidden in the tide-listening pavilion, she would have very likely gone mad and even died. After that, she quickly crossed the Shen Finger realm and entered the celestial phenomenon realm. Wang Xianji had heavily injured her body, but in the end, she had spared her life. Otherwise, even if she received gifts from Zhao Huangchao and Lu Songtao, she would not have been able to escape the mysterious celestial phenomenon tribulation. Could be said that Shen Yuan Qingfeng's path of martial arts was full of ups and downs. She could be said to be the first person after Su Fengyan. Because of this, Su Fengyan had always been very nice to this stubborn woman. It was like this in Beiliang, in the capital, and even more so when they met at Mount Hui. Today, when they met at Mount Hui, he also took the initiative to avoid her. One had to know that Deng Mao and Yelu Dongbed did not have this kind of treatment. To be more precise, Su Fengyan and Shen Yuan Qingfeng could not be said to be in love. Perhaps Su Fengyan was empathizing with her because they were in the same boat, while she was most likely the one who had accumulated resentment in her heart. That was why the man and woman, who had reached the peak of martial arts the fastest in Liyang, were so entangled. Although Su Fengnian had long known that Shenyuan Qingfeng was very competitive, she was already the first female martial arts alliance chief in several hundred years. Why did she still want to fight for the illusory title of #1 in the world? This was something that Su Fengnian could not understand no matter how much he thought about it. This farce, which was all bark and no bite, made many of the spectators feel bored. This was how the world was. It was fine if one did not give hope, but the worst thing was to give hope and then disappoint. Many of the hot-tempered people of Zhang, who could not help but loudly mock and ridicule, whispering malicious words. For some reason, Shenyuan Qingfeng, who had not appeared in purple for a long time, cast a sidelong glance at this group of noisy spectators. With just a glance, everyone was silent like cicadas in winter. Su Fengnian could not help but laugh. Looking at those fellows who were secretly shrinking their necks, he thought to himself that when he was roaming Jianghu and watching those high and mighty young heroes and fairies, this was probably the same scene. Afterwards, Su Fengnian and Shenyuan Qingfeng continued to climb the mountain under the guidance of Han Gui and Qing Xian. They passed Meili Peak and Jiao Slope, and then Wudong's main mountain, Big Lotus Peak. Shenyuan Qingfeng was silent the entire way. When they reached the foot of Lotus Peak, she finally opened her mouth and said, Li Chuangong's two-sleeved green snake, Dong Tai's inverted tai, Gu Jiantong's thunder core, Song Yanqing's last sword move, Huang Zhentu's 9th sword, 6,000 miles, Huang Qing's 16 bodhisattvas, and Master Lu Hao's thunder pool. Before we reach the peak, tell me all of them. Seeing Su Fengnian frown, Shenyuan Qingfeng said coldly, if you have a move that you don't want to say, you can substitute it with a similar move, or a move that you created yourself is fine. Hearing that long list of names, the little Taoist child Qing Xian felt as if thunder was rolling. It was too frightening. She only felt that this elder sister's appetite was really big. Su Fengnian asked in a deep voice, you want to gather the strengths of 100 schools of thought and merge them into one? You really don't want to give up on becoming a land immortal? Didn't Zhao Huangchao remind you back then that your situation is somewhat similar to my younger brother, Huang Manor? You were lucky enough to escape the disaster of the mysterious finger heavenly phenomenon realm. If you still insist on becoming a land immortal, aren't you afraid that it will be short-lived? Shenyuan Qingfeng said indifferently, that's my business. From the beginning to the end, this person was not a likable woman. Su Fengnian smiled and said, all right, I can't teach you the two-sleeved green snake of the sheepskin fur old man. In fact, I can't teach you at all in a short period of time, and I can't make the decision to teach you the peach blossom sword deity's inverted sword either. As for old Huang's saber 9, don't even think about it. However, Gu Jiantong's thunder cube, Song Yanqing's flying sword, and Lu Haosher's thunder pool are all not a problem. Huang Qing's 16 sword points sitting Buddha is also not difficult. Other than that, I'll tell you about Tuoba Bodhisattva's unique chi circulation method, as well as the 2 trump cards of Bing Mountain's 5th raccoon and Murong Baoding. If you learn fast enough, I still have many good things. I'll take them all. This time it was Shenyuan Qingfeng's turn to feel incredulous. He turned his head and stared at this somewhat abnormal fellow. Her eyes seemed to be saying, it's one thing for me to ask for a sky-high price, but you're even saving me money by sitting on the ground. Su Fengnian smiled and said, I'll teach you one by one, but you have to promise me one condition. In the future, when you find one or a few disciples, you have to teach them everything you know, even if it means that you don't want this bit of Jianghu to end. Then, the 4 of them went up the mountain. Han Gui intentionally led the little Taoist child Qing Xian in front, putting a large distance between them. Su Fengnian really did tell Shenyuan Qingfeng everything he knew. He explained the essence of the world's top martial arts to Shenyuan Qingfeng. Shenyuan Qingfeng memorized everything. Occasionally, when there was something he didn't understand, he would get to the bottom of it without hesitation. He would even interrupt Su Fengnian's speech when there was a subtlety, thinking carefully before allowing him to continue. On this section of the mountain road, Su Fengnian was like a knowledgeable teacher, while Shenyuan Qingfeng was a competent disciple who diligently memorized everything. At the back of Big Lotus Peak on the back of the White Dragon, which was only 1 li away from the peak, Han Gui, who was standing in the distance, turned his head and discovered that the two people had stopped. What happened next made this young Taoist, who was very likely to be the next Wudong sect leader, speechless. When Su Fengnian and the woman parted ways, the former kicked the latter's butt, neither lightly nor heavily. The latter was obviously angry from embarrassment, and the entire White Dragon's back was filled with killing intent. However, the young king said something, and the woman was stunned for a moment before giving up and going down the mountain. The little Taoist child Qing Xian immediately prostrated himself in admiration. He thought that if he could also wander the Jianghu in the future, he must have at least half of the elegance of the king of Beiliang. When the three of them went up the mountain again, even Han Gui couldn't help but ask curiously, "Your Highness and that woman are old acquaintances?" Su Fengnian smiled and nodded. He said softly, "She's an enemy we've known for many years, and kicking her was a person's dream." The little Taoist child of the Qing generation thought about it seriously. Thinking about that fairy sister's cold and elegant appearance and arrogant manner, he didn't think that person's dream was childish at all. He laughed and said, "Your Highness, that kick was very awe-inspiring. I like it." Han Gui rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache. A cold snort came from far away. It scared the little Taoist child so much that he had goosebumps all over his body. Su Fengnian rubbed the child's head and said gloatingly, "You're in trouble. For the next 20 years, don't go down the mountain and go to the Jianghu." The little Taoist child asked timidly, "That sister, is she very powerful?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "A woman who wants to be the second Wang Shenji? Don't you think she's very powerful?" The little Taoist child said with a bitter face, "No wonder Junior Grand Uncle always said that the woman at the foot of the mountain is a tiger." At this moment, a white-robed monk walked down from the top of the mountain, his sleeves fluttering. He looked like he was going to fight Su Fengnian to the death. Chapter 15:24. Su Fengnian was a bit embarrassed by the white-clothed monk's aggressive approach. He wasn't afraid, but he couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Which father in the world wouldn't be angry at the bastard who dared to trick their own daughter? Back when Li Thing ran away from home and snuck out of the 2 Zen temples to roam the Jianghu, she carried around 200 taels of silver. It was probably her father's accumulated wealth from lecturing in the temples for many years. In the end, when she met the three of them, she ate and drank without restraint and quickly became penniless. Perhaps this heroine had let it slip when she returned home and bore a grudge against the white-clothed monk. Su Fengnian knew that he was in the wrong, so he could only force a smile and make up his mind not to retaliate or scold. The white-clothed monk walked quickly with large strides. There was actually a woman following behind him. She couldn't be considered very beautiful, and the makeup on her face was a bit thick. It turned out that Li Thing had hung half a kilogram of rouge on her face in Wutongan back then, because she had learned it from her family. The white-clothed monk hurriedly came in front of Su Fengnian and pointed at Su Fengnian's nose, denouncing him. "Where are my daughter and my disciple Nanbei? I heard that you thought they had too many tables to eat, so you chased them to Shishu and Nanzhou. Is this how your Mount Qing Liang treats its guests? If I see that my daughter has lost a few kilograms, do you believe that I won't go to your doorstep and scold you?" The woman who came to the white-clothed monk's side first smiled at Su Fengnian, then tugged at his monk robe and muttered in a small voice, "What do you mean by I or I? You have to call yourself a poor monk. How many times did Li Thing tell you after she returned to the mountain? An expert must have the bearing and demeanor of an expert. Li Thing always said that there was a swordsman who traveled the Jianghu with her. What was his name again? Old Huang?" She could tell at a glance that he was an expert. "Li Shaoxin, look at yourself. Is this proper?" The white-clothed monk was clearly still angry. He gave a cold snort and changed his tone slightly. "Do you believe that I won't go to Mount Qingliang to scold and make a scene? It's just that this poor monk didn't bring the knife that has been sharpened countless times today." The woman seemed to have more worldly wisdom than her man. She coughed and interrupted the white-robed monk's threatening words. She turned her head to Su Fengnian and explained with a smile, "Your Highness, don't listen to this bald man's nonsense. There's no such thing as a knife. In fact, it's just something that the old abbot of our temple uses to chop firewood. The father of this thing just misses that old bald man. Oh no, he misses his master. So, from time to time, he takes it out to sharpen the knife, afraid that it will rust. The old abbot did not leave anything behind, only a hatchet, a handwritten copy of the Diamond Sutra, and that big vat for washing our hands after returning from work every day. The hatchet and the sutra were still all right, we took them, but that vat was a bit heavy, so we had no choice but to leave it in the temple. Otherwise, in the future, we would have one more item for our dowry. The monk in white said helplessly, "How can you treat a water jar as your daughter's dowry?" The woman rolled her eyes and said, "How many famous people in Gangnam do like to use the mud at the bottom of the vat to make pots? It's worth a lot of money." Su Funyun smiled and agreed. "That's right. I once saw Jiangnan's Liu family's minister Liu from the Ministry of Rites use a famous pot. It was made in the early years when he went to the two Zen temples to burn incense, using various methods to ask the old abbot for a few kilograms of mud." The woman immediately beamed with joy, looking at this young vassal king who did not have any heirs, more and more pleasing to the eye. "That's right, that's right." Then she stared at the monk in white and said, "Speak properly. Don't injure us." Li Dongxin rubbed his bald head. Everything had its vanquisher, and the words of his wife were more effective than an imperial edict. At this time, Han Gui was finally able to get a word in. He bowed and said, "I am Han Gui from the Little Pillar Peaks Green Mountain Monastery. I have long been fascinated by monk Wu Chan." Li Dongxin looked at this Wudong Taoist, who was not famous before the battle between Buddhism and Taoism. Compared to the way he treated Su Funyun, he smiled a little more and returned the greeting. "Greetings, Jinren Han. There are 3 debates on Lotus Peak this time, and you and I will be in the 3rd debate on the last day. When the time comes, I hope Jinren Han will be merciful." Han Gui smiled and said, "I am really not worthy of being called Jinren. 2 Zen monks can just call me Taoist Han." Li Dongxin laughed and said, "Taoist is a person of the Tao, a person who has attained the Tao, a Taoist priest, a person who has proven the Tao, a Jinren, a person who seeks the truth. It is better for me to call you Jinren Han. If Wang Zhonglo was here, I might as well call him Taoist Wang. If Hong Shixiang was standing in front of me, then I would really have to respectfully call him Taoist Hong." Han Gui smiled and did not say anything. Li Dongxin glanced at Han Gui's clear eyes and retracted his sharpness. He sighed softly. "Your Wudong and Mount Longhu are indeed different. If those yellow and purple nobles heard this, not to mention the old Taoist of the Hope generation, even those of the Ning generation would be furious and would not have peace." Han Gui said calmly, "It is not that Wudong Taoists have a longer peace of mind compared to Mount Longhu. It is just that the cultivation paths of the 2 mountains are different, but in the end, different paths lead to the same goal. My master and Master Wang are extremely respectful of Mount Longhu's old Jinren Zhao Shituan. They have invited him to Wudong to discuss the Tao. Every time he passed by Beiliang, he would never refuse because of the different sections. I have personally heard Jinren Zhao talk about the unification of the 3 sects twice and benefited greatly." The white-robed monk smiled and asked, "If I remember correctly, it was your Wudong's ancestor Liu who first advocated the unification of the 3 sects? Then I would like to ask, who is part of it?" Han Gui blurted out without thinking. "Ancestor Liu once said that the Tao is the same. This is the root of the unification of the 3 sections. In my humble opinion, I don't know what it is, but I know what it is not. It is this one. It may not be in the hands of the Wudong monks who have reached the depths of Zen, nor may it be on Mount Wudong where Buddhism is destroyed and Taoism is flourishing. Similarly, it may not be in the mouths of those scholars who are good at talking." Li Dongxin touched his bald head again. His eyes seemed to be full of admiration. He nodded and said apologetically, "I have rudely probed you 3 times. Please don't blame me, Jinren Han." Han Gui smiled and said, It's fine, it's fine." The group of people climbed the mountain together. The white-robed monk and Han Gui casually chatted about Wudong's local customs. There was neither Buddhism nor Taoism. It was as if they had met an old friend in a foreign land. Their words were as slippery as watermelon skin. The white-robed monk deliberately ignored Su Fengnian. He was probably afraid that he would not be able to hold back and look for a knife to chop people. If a man met someone who was trying to steal his wife, he would pick up a knife and chop the person without hesitation. If he met someone who was trying to steal his daughter, whether he would chop or not depended on not only the character of the daring little bastard, but also the attitude of the daughter's mother. At this time, Li Dongshi's mother, or rather the little monk Nanbei's master's wife, was extremely amiable towards Su Fengnian, although it was not the gaze of a mother-in-law that would grow fonder the more she looked at her son-in-law. It was as if she had met a young man of the younger generation who was interested in her daughter. She was not deliberately warm, but she would definitely not lower her face to treat Su Fengnian. The woman's heart was boundless. At first, she was still a little reserved. After all, the young man in front of her was the #1 figure in the Northwest. But soon, success came naturally. She began to nag about family matters and complained that in Beiliang's territory, he was really spending money. Especially when she brought a lot of rouge and face powder back from Beiliang. She had already used it all. In the end, when she went to the shop in Yuzhou to take a look, the price was really expensive. Speaking of this, the woman thanked Su Fengnian very much. She said that the daughter of Li Dongshi did not know the importance of things, and had accepted so many expensive gifts in one go when she left Mount Qing Liang's mansion. After that, the woman smiled and frankly said that she would never be able to pay back the money. This time, she left in a hurry and did not bring any gifts back. Therefore, she had long squandered all the savings at home. The smile on Su Fengnian's face never disappeared as he listened to the woman's blabbering. The little Taoist boy Qing Xian, who was eavesdropping on both sides, felt strange. It was strange enough that his master, a Taoist priest, could get along well with the famous white-robed monk who was known as the Bodhisattva of flesh. How could the king of Beiliang get along well with that woman? The white-robed monk Li Dongxin was the most important figure in the debate on Lotus Peak. As the current head of the two Zen temples, he himself was the leader of Buddhism under the heavens. Su Fengnian was also a top-honored guest of Wudong. As a result, this group of people headed straight for Wudong's Xiang Palace at the top of the mountain to settle down. Wudong originally did not have the habit of dividing people into different ranks. However, very quickly, Wudong Mountain discovered that while they did not pay attention to it, the mountain visitors paid the most attention to it. It was from the mouths of the guests that the 9 palaces and 36 temples that originally belonged to Wudong Mountain's Taoism actually already had a ranking system in Jianghu. Being able to stay in the 9 palaces was something that could demonstrate one's official status and position in Jianghu the most. If one was able to enter one of the 8 upper temples of the 36 temples to rest, then it was also worth being complacent about. Following the increase in the number of visitors, especially the arrival of the 2 famous families of Jiangnan and Huainan, many of the lower 8 temples that were far from the main peak were also overcrowded, to the extent that they had no choice but to close their doors and decline visitors. Just as Su Fengnian and the white-robed monks group stepped foot into the Xiang Palace from the back door, a delicate and pretty little Taoist boy rushed in front of Su Fengnian and said in a low voice with a sad face, "Grand Marshal Uncle, a new group of honored guests have arrived on the mountain. The Taoist master personally accompanied them on a tour of our main peak. The guests are also not like the usual foreigners who make many requests. They did not insist on resting on the mountain. They said that they had already booked rooms at the small town at the foot of the mountain. But the Taoist master personally said that these guests could not be neglected. He wanted us to make 3 or 4 elegant and quiet rooms for them. My master and a few martial uncles were all worried to death. With great difficulty, they were only able to find 2 rooms in the Xiang Palace. Any more than that really could not be done. The Divine Firmament Temple and the Void Temple that are near the top of the mountain are also in a difficult position, saying that even the woodshed has been vacated for the guests to stay in. Then there's no reason for us to let half of the guests stay on the mountain and half leave the mountain, right?" Chapter 15:25. Su Fengnian had met most of the Taoists from both Qing and Ning generations when he was practicing his blade on the mountain. He had a photographic memory, so he asked with a smile, "Little Taoist Ning He? Who are you? Why are you so important?" The little Taoist had accompanied the ox-riding Grand Marshal Uncle to welcome the person in front of him at the mountain gate. Naturally, he knew Su Fengnian's identity. The little Taoist quickly bowed and said, "Your Highness, I heard from Martial Uncle Qingfeng that he is a student of Shangyin Academy's Mr. Han." Su Fengyan was enlightened. He had received a spy report from Qingsong City in Lu Province. It said that Mr. Han continued his journey west to Mount Lantuo, but when he heard that there was going to be a battle between Buddhism and Taoism on Mount Wudong, he sent a few disciples back to Liangzhou and met up with the immortal of wine, Chang Sui, who had gone to Jibei alone. The old man only brought his granddaughter, Han Guoxiu, and a few escorts to continue his journey. Su Fengyan only dared to hope that one of Han Guzi's disciples would stay in Beiliang. It would be best if it was Su Huang, a master of the art of war. If it was the carefree Sima Ken, it would also be good. Su Fengyan felt a little regretful when he heard the news. If only 1 or 2 people came to Mount Wudong, they would most likely be working for Beiliang. But even Chang Sui came, it probably meant that none of them would stay in Beiliang. Su Fengyan sighed in his heart and said with a smile, "Little Taoist Ning He, go and tell your master that this king's room will be given to these guests." This king guessed that it would not be difficult for 2 or 3 people to stay in that room. The little Taoist did not dare to say anything. Han Gui said gently, "Ning He, just do as your highness said. Also, give Qing Xian and my room to the guests." Before Han Gui could finish, the little Taoist said loudly, "Grand Marshal Uncle, how can we do that? Little Pillar Peak is more than 10 miles away from Green Mountain Monastery and Lotus Peak. Every time Qing Xian, Marshal Uncle Qing Xian comes to Lotus Flower Peak to play with us. No, she comes to Lotus Flower Peak to help Marshal Granduncle borrow books. She's always exhausted." The voice of the little Taoist of the Ning generation became softer and softer as he spoke. Han Gui's disciple, Qing Xian, wished she could dig a hole and hide in it. She was done for. When she returned to the Green Mountain Monastery, she would be punished to copy the classics 10 times. The white-robed monk turned to his wife and clicked his tongue. "Look at the juniors on the mountain. They're all siding with their elders. Those little baldies who play with the stupid Nanbei all want to eat and drink in our house all day long." The woman smiled and said, "You're wrong. They're clearly targeting our daughter. Usually, the little monks I see on the way to the temple are very sloppy. But every time they come to our house, which one of them doesn't wear clean monk robes that have just been washed?" The white-robed monk flew into a rage. "Is there such a thing?" The woman rolled her eyes and said, "You just found out." The white-robed monk said angrily, "Those little baldies are asking for a beating, and the stupid Nanbei is even more stupid. If this isn't inviting a wolf into the house, then what is?" The woman said unhappily, beat them until they have an epiphany. It's better that you don't have to be the abbot who doesn't take money but only gives out money." In the end, Han Gui and the little Taoist went to stay with the Qing generation disciple of the Jinlu Jinren Chunyao. And Su Fengyan went to the thatched hut at the elephant pond halfway up the mountain where he used to practice his blade. Before going down the mountain, Su Fengyan first sent the white-robed monk to the room where he stayed. Han Gui took the lead and left. At this time, everyone on Mount Wudong was extremely busy. Other than being responsible for bringing Su Fengyan to the Xiang Palace, Han Gui actually had a lot of work to do. In fact, the Taoists of all generations on the mountain knew that Han Gui was going to take on a big responsibility in the future. After all, even the old chief Wang Zhonglo said that Han Gui's Taoist heart was the most stable. Even Hong Shixiang half-jokingly said that there were many small pillars of osmanthus trees on the mountain, which was most suitable for Han Gui, who had the word osmanthus in his name to cultivate and comprehend Taoism. And the 2 most senior Jinren Chenyao and Yu Xingrui of Mount Wudong today also valued Han Gui, a junior who stood aloof from worldly affairs. Su Fengyan sent him to the doorstep. After the white-robed monk pushed the door open, he suddenly turned around and asked, "Have you met my senior uncle?" Su Fengyan was stunned for a moment before he realized that he was talking about the chicken soup monk at the foot of the Little Rotten Tua Mountain in the western region. The old monk was the senior brother of the Dragon Tree Holy Monk. He nodded and said, "I can fight with Tuoba Bodhisattva and not die." Li Dongxin waved his hand. "He's already dead. Who are you trying to say nice things to?" Su Fengyan was silent and speechless. The white-robed monk sighed and said sadly, "But then again, the reason why Senior Uncle was able to plant the lotus in my heart was because of your appearance. Back then, when I traveled thousands of miles to the west alone, it was because Senior Uncle was worried. His original intention was to go to the western region to bring me back to the two Zen temples. He didn't expect that one stop would last for more than 20 years. This penniless monk's epiphany is also thanks to Martial Uncle's insights. Alright, that's a separate matter. The matter of my daughter is not over yet. But for Senior Uncle to be able to plant the lotus, I have to thank you." Li Dongxin lowered his head and put his palms together. Su Fengyan put his palms together and gently returned the greeting. After Su Fengyan left, the white-robed monk closed the door. The woman sat on the chair and rubbed her calf. She smiled and said, "There's only one daughter. Even though the North and the South are stupid, they're already a family. Sigh, if only I had 2 daughters." Chapter 15:26. Li Xiaoxin muttered softly, "Even if I have 2 daughters, I still don't want to be this kid's father-in-law. Every time I see him, I'll chase him away with a broom." For the first time, the woman did not argue. She said softly, "When I was chatting with this child, I talked about how our family was too playful. As he chatted with me, he casually said something that was quite interesting. The general idea was that when he was young, he was truly naughty and mischievous. When he was young, he would always disdain his elders for restraining him. In the end, when he finally grew up, he suddenly realized that when he made a mistake, no one would scold him. Instead, he missed his childhood." The white-robed monk leaned back in his chair and rubbed his bald head. For some reason, he also missed the scene when he was young and would nag at his master's ear. Before Su Fengyan walked out of Xiang Palace, a spy leader from the Fu Shui chamber and a military officer whose territory was near Mount Wudong appeared together. The two of them were dressed in casual clothing no different from normal pilgrims. They had seized this rare opportunity to report to the prince. This made Su Fengyan seem like a noble young master who had brought his servants and servants out for a trip. Today, there were no poor people in Xiang Palace. Most of them were foreigners who had deep connections with Huagai County and even the entire Beiliang officialdom. Everyone was either rich or noble. Otherwise, they were people like Su Huang and Sima Ken, who had enough confidence to look down on nobles. It was said that even the eldest son of the Hezhou provincial governor and the daughter of the Ji provincial governor had climbed the mountain together, but they were still not allowed to enter Xiang Palace. They could only stay in the Heaven Temple. Su Fengyan listened to the two's concise and respectful reports. He did not give any orders. As they neared the elephant cleansing pool, he let them do their own things. They didn't talk much, but the two of them still felt honored. Regardless of whether it was the shrewd spy or the steadfast military officer with real power, when they looked at each other and smiled, they couldn't hide the smiles on their faces. This kind of honor came from the bottom of their hearts. It was the attitude of the other officialdom officials to get close to the big shots of the officialdom to get familiar with them. In fact, there was a world of difference. Su Fengyan revisited this place and found that the quiet and empty elephant cleansing pool of the past was extraordinarily lively. Could be said that the crowd was shoulder to shoulder. After asking, he found out that there were 2 people competing on the giant rock in the pool. The rules were very simple. Whoever fell from the rock into the pool would lose. Su Fengyan really could not squeeze his way to the edge of the pool. He could only stand about 50 steps away from the elephant cleansing pool. In the stream of people, there were many hawkers with bamboo chests hanging in front of their chests. They were shouting, "Watching 2 masters fight. How can we not drink a big cup of our Beiliang's green ant wine? Or buy 2 jugs of wine and we'll give you a copy of the King of Beiliang's martial arts quotations from Mount Wudong for free." The 2 masters on the giant rock in the pool were in the midst of a fierce battle. Su Fengyan's ears were filled with loud cheers. As far as the eye could see, only when the 2 masters leaped high in the air could he see their silhouettes. 1 saber, 1 sword. The light of the saber and the shadow of the sword reflected each other's brilliance. This was probably the so-called floating like a startled swan. Su Fengyan did not know why his interest was piqued. He bought some melon seeds and red dates from a hawker. Like most of the spectators, he stood on his tiptoes and stretched his neck, listening to the spectators beside him explain their moves in surprise. He was somewhat self-deprecating. Look at how imposing the other people were when they were fighting. The spectators were as numerous as the clouds, the cheers shaking the sky. Compared to his final confrontation with Tuoba Bodhisattva in the small alley, this was countless times more awe-inspiring. That's right, it seemed like this was the Jianghu that he had dreamed of when he was young. Su Fengyan leisurely ate the melon seeds, listening to the friendly introductions that did not even charge him a single copper coin. He was very satisfied. According to the most well-informed ears around him, Su Fengyan learned that the two young warriors who were showing off their skills to their heart's content were not nameless juniors in the Jianghu. Among the new top 10 experts in the great snow plains of Mount Hui, the Jianghu talent with the famous sword Wu Shu Su was a close friend of the direct disciple of one of the grandmasters. Their relationship was a little distant. Could an ordinary cat or dog be related to the direct disciple of the new top 10 experts in the world? As for the local Beiliang youngster who used the saber, he was even more influential. It was said that even the king of Beiliang, Su Fengyan, cherished his talent and even personally taught him 2 or 3 moves of the saber technique. Hearing this, Su Fengyan could not help but grimace even more than when he heard Miss East-West say that she had seen through old Huang's identity with just a glance. Just as Su Fengyan was feeling a little depressed, the crowd was forcibly pushed aside. Su Fengyan turned his head to look and saw 2 men walking side by side. Both of them looked solemn. One of them was holding a long sword, the other had his hands behind his back. It seemed like they were about to participate in a peak battle for the title of top 10 experts in the world. Su Fengyan could only follow the crowd around him and make way for the 2 experts. It turned out that after the battle between the 2 young warriors on the giant rock had ended, it was the turn of these 2 Jianghu heroes who were more important in the Jianghu to compete on the stage. One of them was known as the Jiangnan Plum Rain Sword, while the other was known as the Central Plains Divine Dragon. Just listen, with such a respectable nickname, how could they not be heroes? While Su Fengyan made way for the 2 heroes, he thought to himself that he did not seem to have any good nicknames. It was a little unreasonable. Back then, when the 4 of them wandered the Jianghu in poor conditions, not to mention the heroine Li East-West who gave herself a string of nicknames the other 2 all had. Su Fengyan sighed and ate melon seeds. Not only was he depressed at the moment, but his crotch was also depressed. Chapter 15:27. Su Fengyan suddenly turned around and saw a group of familiar faces. Su Huang with his beautiful beard, Sima Qin who always had a bright smile on his face, Lu Duanmao with his evil-looking face, Jean Baosher with a cold expression, and an unfamiliar middle-aged man who reeked of alcohol and carried a long sword. He should be the famous wine immortal Chang Sui. Su Huang laughed in a low voice and said, "I met Taoist Han in Purple Sun Palace, and heard that your highness has come to the mountain. So, I have to find your highness and thank you." What was supposed to be a harmonious and courteous conversation was completely destroyed by Chang Sui's arm around Su Fengyan's shoulder. After all, this fellow had directly put his arm around Su Fengyan's shoulder and said in a loud and careless manner, "I've made a trip to North Ji, and only then did I know that not only are the infantry under Yen Wenlwan's command the best in the world, even the cavalry of Yuzhou is not something that the cavalry of Liangbie can compare with. Originally, I thought that Mr. would not let go of his old face, so I could find an excuse, saying that I was not acclimatized to Beiliang and had to rest for 3 to 4 years. But I did not expect that Mr. would be so generous this time, even throwing Su Huang and the others to Beiliang. So, it is just nice as we can still be together. But I tried so hard, but it backfired. After we bid farewell in Jibei, it should be the last time I see Mr. in this life. If I had known this would happen, I would have followed him to Qingcang City in Lu Province. Su Fengyan, we are going to follow you in the future. Why don't we take this opportunity to discuss something and ask for the position of general for Su Huang? Let me put it bluntly first, a position with an unknown title is not going to work. Even if you can't be a general with real power in the border of Liang Province, you can still do it in Lu Province and Yuzhou. With my junior brother Su's full of military strategies, it is more than enough for him to lead an army of 10,000 men. That brat Sima can stay in the Liangzhou provincial governor's office as a 4th or 5th rank official. If you're a little bolder, you might as well shove him to Song Dongming as an assistant. However, you must be careful of this brat seducing the pretty maidservants of your Qingliang mountain. This brat's biggest problem is that he can't control the bird in his pants. As for junior brother Lu Duanmao and junior sister Jean Baosher, you don't have to worry. If there is no official hat for them, they can just find a place to train for a year and a half. Su Huang's face was full of helplessness. Sima Qian's bright smile became forced, while Lu Duanmao simply turned his head and pretended that he did not know this senior brother. Jean Baosher secretly glanced at Su Fengyan with a complicated expression. Since old Mr. Han was so generous, Su Fengyan, who was extremely surprised, was not a petty person. He immediately showed the swift and decisive side of a vassal king and said in a deep voice, "Mr. Su can go to the Huayang Pass Protectorate Office first. I will personally write a letter to Chu Lushan. The military affairs in Beiliang's border have always been strict. To be honest, I, Su Fengyan, dare not guarantee that Mr. Su can immediately become a general in Liang province, but I will definitely not let Mr. Su use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Mr. Sima, you can go straight to Qingliang Mountain and assist Deputy Administrator Song Dongming. Of course, if you don't like being an assistant, you can also go to Liang Province's Provincial Governor Office or Lingzhou's Taiyu County. Right now, there is a merit officer position in the Provincial Governor Office, while Lingzhou's Taiyu County has just vacated a governor. They are both fourth-rank officials. It depends on how Mr. Sima weighs it. As for Mr. Lu, I hope that you can go to Lingzhou to help Provincial Governor Su Beiji. Perhaps your position will not be high at the beginning, but I believe that with Mr. Lu's knowledge and Su Beiji's foresight, Mr. Lu will quickly stand out. As for Miss Jean, I really haven't thought of a plan yet. Let me think about it, but before I go down the mountain, no matter what, I will give Miss Jean a satisfactory answer." When Su Fengyan finished speaking, Sima Qian and Lu Duanmao looked at each other in dismay. Even Su Huang was shocked. Jean Baosher pursed his lips tightly and was in high spirits. Only Chang Sui still looked sloppy. He lazily picked up his wine gourd and drank a mouthful of wine. He wiped his mouth and smiled. "Great!" Su Fengyan said sincerely. "I, Su Fengyan, will of course welcome all of you to stay in Beiliang. My second sister will also be very happy." Chang Sui sighed softly. "Then, other than the eldest apprentice brother who has a grudge with the Su family, and the youngest apprentice brother who has no choice but to stand against you, you have a total of 8 disciples. Currently, 6 of us are working together in Beiliang. Life and death are fated. Riches and honor are in the hands of the heavens. People come and go as they please. The 6 of us are already considered lucky." Chang Sui's last sentence was clearly said to his junior apprentice brother Lu Duanmao, who still had a knot in his heart. Among the 8 of them, Lu Duanmao had the best personal relationship with Prince Zhao Kai. Lu Duanmao turned a deaf ear. Next, Chang Sui suggested that they get together to taste the most authentic green ant wine in the world. Su Fengyan took out all of his silver and bought more than 10 bottles of wine from a vendor. Then, he led them to a nearby thatched cottage. The cottage was cleaned all year round. Although no one lived in it, it did not look decadent at all. Even the small vegetable garden behind the cottage was full of greenery. Su Fengyan moved out bamboo chairs and stools from the cottage with great familiarity. He even took out a table that was originally used to store books. The thatched cottage was not far from the elephant washing pond, but the contrast between the two was clear. This had a lot to do with Mount Wudong's intention. The group of people sat around the table in the open space in front of the cottage. Chang Sui had already begun to drink to his heart's content. Su Huang and Lu Duanmao sat side by side. Jean Baosher sat across from Chang Sui, diagonally across from Su Fengyan. Naturally, Su Huang and Su Fengyan talked about the naval battle of Guangling. When they met in Liuzhou regarding the fact that it was just a civil war that belonged to the Guangling Navy, the two of them each had their own opinions. Just as Sir Han had said, the two of them each had their own opinions. Su Huang guessed half correctly that it was a quick battle, while Su Fengyan guessed correctly that West Chu had won the battle. As for the following situation in Guangling, Su Fengyan and Su Huang had a dispute. Su Huang, a master of the art of war who had traveled through the Old West Chu several times, firmly believed that Liang would quickly form an encirclement, and West Chu's breakthrough point would inevitably be the seemingly unstoppable 100,000 elites from Nanjiang. Only by doing this could they truly gain strategic depth for West Chu and gain a firm foothold in the gap between Jiangsu and Nanjiang, and truly display the advantages of the Guangling River as a natural barrier. Although in this way it would still be difficult to escape the predicament of being pincered by Lu Shengxiang and the Prince of Yen, but compared to desperately defending a corner of West Chu's capital city and only being destined to be nibbled away bit by the Liang imperial court, the situation was still much better. For this reason, Su Fengnian specially dug out a geomancy map of the Guangling Road from his room and slowly spread it out on the table. Su Huang held a wine cup in one hand and used the other to point out the mountains and rivers. He spoke tirelessly. Landscape painting emphasizes power, and when martial artists exchange blows, they also emphasize power. Then, West Chu's power almost reached its peak after Xie defeated Yang Xinqing and Yan Jinchuan on the western front. Ko Jianghuai displayed his brilliance on the eastern front, and Chao Chongqing stabilized the Guangling River in one battle. However, Su Huang filled his half-empty wine cup to the brim, and then pointed to the wine bottle by his hand. No matter how powerful West Chu's power is, it is still only a cup of wine, but Liang's power is as big as a wine bottle. Yang Shunqing's Jizhou infantry suffered a lot of casualties. Yan Jinchuan's cavalry was wiped out in one battle, and even Guangling Prince Zhao Yi's navy was completely wiped out. But the wine in the bottle is still more than the wine in this cup, a lot more. And this is just us talking about the military on paper, talking about the number of troops. The real general trend of Liang is that after the new emperor ascended the throne, the people of Liang are still stable, so much so that it can be said that they are becoming more and more stable. The Yong Hui auspicious talisman is far less turbulent than what outsiders imagine. Therefore, in the Battle of West Chu in Liang, the former can succeed in one battle, while the latter can only lose one battle. Su Huang pointed to a strategic town on the north bank of Guangling River and a pass in Jianzhou on the south bank. He said in a deep voice, "If I were Chao Chongqing, when the old General Wu Zhongshuan leads half of the Nanjiang army to cross the river, I would send a valiant general who dares to fight a tough battle and 10,000 elite troops south to cut off their retreat. Then, I would send a veteran general who is good at defense to guard the western front door, so that the Nanjiang army of 100,000 can neither fight nor retreat comfortably." Su Fengnian bent over slightly to look at the map, frowned and said softly, "The deputy commander of Beiliang's infantry, great ancestor Gu, has mentioned Wu Zhongshuan, this veteran general. He thinks that this person's command of the army is far above Yang Xinqing and Yan Jinchuan. He also has many valiant generals under his command. Wu Zhongshuan will definitely keep an eye on his rear if he has to travel a long distance to fight in a foreign land." Su Huang shot a glance at Sima Can, who was sitting cross-legged and munching on melon seeds. The latter resentfully put down the handful of melon seeds in his hand and sat upright. He said, "Wu Zhongshuan and the group of meritorious generals by his side are all experienced men who have fought many battles. They would not be so careless. However, according to military books, it is said that they do not transport grain for 1,000 miles. This is a hidden danger of the southern border army. More importantly, it is a fatal flaw that is not something that Wu Zhongshuan and the others can solve. That is, no matter how hot-blooded and passionate the battle on the battlefield is, it has always been a silent ripple of the battle in the imperial court. Since the late emperor of Liang, no one has trusted the prince of Yanqi Zhaobing. The current emperor is no exception. Isn't it using northern Mang to cut down the 300,000 cavalry of northern Liang's territory, and using western Chu to cut down the 200,000 ferocious troops of southern border's territory? If Wu Zhongshuan easily took West Chu, wouldn't the officials of Great Peace City be afraid of the 100 to 200,000 southern barbarians? If they had nothing to do, they would run right under their noses to show off their might." Chapter 15:28. Sima Can couldn't help but secretly pick up a handful of melon seeds from the table again. While eating melon seeds, he said vaguely, "Beiliang's transport is trapped, and the 100,000 troops in Nanjiang are not really comfortable. Therefore, in this battle, if Wu Zhongshuan was able to defeat Chao Zhangqing, that would be because he had the ability to reach the heavens. During this period of time, the imperial court would definitely make a move. It was the same logic as when Yan Jinchuan had no choice but to tacitly understand and take the risk to advance. Liang imperial court is the happiest when the battle reaches a stalemate. If they lose, they will be reorganized by Lu Shengxiang, the commander-in-chief of the southern expedition. Not a single soldier will be able to return to Nanjiang. Maybe even Wu Zhongshuan will have to enter the capital to be an official. Didn't Tangxi Sword with Lu Baijie just get demoted from the position of Minister of War to the position of Administrator? Won't Wu Zhongshuan be moved? Don't you want to compete with the newly appointed Assistant Minister of War, Tang Taizuang? You are young, and your military achievements are not that good. You are not as famous as me. What right do you have to compete with me for the position? Besides, didn't Tian City say that a civil official who doesn't want to be the Grand Secretary is not a good civil official? A general who doesn't want to be the Minister of War is not a good general. Jean Bauscher stepped heavily on the guy's foot under the table. Sima Qian was obviously a person who had been tortured. His expression didn't change, but he was finally not so cynical. Although the imperial court of Liang is domineering, watching the battle of Liangmang from the other side, personally fighting with the rebels of West Chu, and deliberately playing tricks with the vassals of the older generation, I have to say that the late emperor of Liang is really a powerful monarch. If you look at the history books, if you don't talk about the military achievements, he should be in the top 5. Let's not talk about other things. Let's just talk about the general trend of removing vassals. Let's not talk about Beiliang. That Zhao Ying, the Duke of Huainan, went to the battlefield and died, right? Zhao Sui, the Duke of Jiaodong, has been guarding the door of the northeast for so many years, right? Zhao Sun, the hereditary king of Jing'an, also wished he could pour out his heart to the imperial court and carve the word loyalty on his forehead, right? That was why it was said that in a history book of the spring and autumn annals, it was about generals from various countries appearing on stage. Emperors and civil officials were all written to the side. Every page was filled with the words martial artists, save the country. As for the spring of eternal Hui, it was replaced with the words literati rule the country. With Zhang Julu leading the charge and the 5 ministers outside of the Ministry of War working together, it was truly a magnificent sight. Even 1,000 years later, as long as you are a scholar, you will feel proud of this glorious history. Sima Qian suddenly paused and looked around like a storyteller who was keeping people in suspense. He took a sip of wine and said, "Then, here's the problem. Why is it that on the surface the longer Liang drags on, the greater the chance of victory, while Beimang drags on, the smaller the chance of victory? Why is it that Xiandi still insists on having Guangling Road burn, and then let Beimang feel that they have a chance to invade the south at this time? Fighting on 2 fronts, aren't you afraid that even the thickest of assets will be squandered?" Chang Sui was overjoyed and pointed at his shitty with his wine gourd. "In the future, if you can't make a name for yourself in Beiliang, then go to the restaurant and be a storyteller. Xixiang, I will set up the stage for you. Jin Shimi will take the money." Su Fengyan smiled and gave the answer. For the elite troops in the world, it is already the limit to maintain their prosperity for 20 to 30 years. After that, they will only get worse and worse, and their shortcomings will gradually increase. Our Beiliang cavalry started in the spring and autumn annals, and now it has been 30 years. First, Great Peace City is afraid that our Beiliang frontier army will not be able to fight Beimang as time passes. Second, they are afraid that our Su Fengyan will have ill intentions after he stabilizes his position and grasps power. A very simple example. If my father had said in the past that he wanted to divide the river with the Zhao family, at least half of the soldiers would have left, and the morale of the army would have fallen. But if it was during the last years of Yonghui, Su Shao, who was deeply rooted in Beiliang, mentioned this, the 300,000 cavalry would all be old people rooted in Beiliang. Not many people would leave. When our Su Fengyan truly holds power for 4 to 5 years, and has all the generals of the border army in his hands, Beiliang, who has never had a good impression of Great Peace City, will not point their spear at Liang. It will be normal in the eyes of Jing for them to establish their own country on the northwest border, right? Chang Sui laughed and said, "That's human nature." Sima Qian asked with a smile, "Wang Yi, have you really not thought about this?" Su Fengyan shook his head, not saying anything. Chang Sui finally opened his mouth to talk about serious matters. With hazy drunken eyes, he said, "When it comes to the various armies in the world, there are actually not many that can be called heroic. My old foundation is the Southern Ji Infantry of the Northern Han Imperial Guard, which has already been ruined by Yang Xinxing. Yan Jinchuan's cavalry was originally one of the best elite cavalry in Liang. Unfortunately, the old general died a sullen death and did not die in battle. Now, the number of soldiers left can be counted on one hand. The newly appointed administrator of Huainan, Kainan, has expanded from 60,000 to 80,000, and her military strength has decreased by quite a bit. The Minister of War, Tang Taizuang, has single-handedly trained the elite cavalry of Liaodong's Duoyen, which is extraordinary. The Blackwater cavalry of the vassal prince of Liaoxi, Zhao Sui, is also not bad. Wu Zhongshuan's great armor of the southern frontier is said to be able to compete with Yan Wenluan's Yuzhou infantry. The king of Yan, Zhao Bing, personally leads the 40,000 Wufeng army. As for the navy, the Guangling Navy has been split into two, so there is no need to mention it. The Qingzhou Navy has long been corrupted by the officials of the Green Party. If they can fight with words, they will probably be invincible. No matter how you look at it, only your northern Liang border army has been able to maintain its sharpness for a full 30 years. Chang Sui stood up and said slowly, "In the Central Plains, relying on natural barriers and cities will definitely not be able to stop Beimang's iron hooves. Therefore, I want to stand here in the only Beiliang frontier army that can withstand the disadvantage of numbers and not take a step back. I want to use my meager strength to block for the Central Plains." Chang Sui raised his head and drank half of the gourd of wine. At the mouth of the gourd in Yuzhou, there are 2 cities and hundreds of fortresses. When Beimang's hooves advance, it will only be after the Beiliang's defenders are all dead. Chang Sui muttered to himself, "Before I personally went to the border, I always felt that it was grand and majestic when I wrote poems after getting drunk. Only now do I know that the true border of 100 battles is not at all as heroic as the scholars imagined." Chapter 15:29. Chang Sui said loudly, "Why write poems for the dead? It's better to die here and leave your last words." Sima Can said softly, "Second martial brother is really drunk." Su Huang suddenly stood up and raised a cup of wine. He looked at Su Fengyan and said, "To gourd mouth of Yuzhou, to Tiger Head City of Liangzhou, to Qingcang City of Liuzhou, a toast to the prince." Sima Ken, Lu Duanmao, and Jean Baosher also stood up and raised their cups. Su Fengyan stood up and said softly, "I don't deserve this toast. You can all drink a toast to the Beiliang, who has lived up to his name for the Central Plains for 20 years. In the end, Sima Ken was so drunk that he had to look for a cup under the table. Chang Sui also sang at the top of his voice, but he was humming in the dialect of his hometown that no one could understand. Su Huang also couldn't escape this calamity. This beautiful bearded man, who valued elegance the most, drank until his beard was covered in wine. Even Jean Baosher, who drank the least, drank until his cheeks turned red. This made Su Fengyan, who drank the most but was still sober, feel a little embarrassed. One time, when he pulled Sima Can out from under the table, he looked up and saw the woman with smiling eyes. Su Fengyan blushed and said, "I'm the only one who isn't drunk. It's a bit of a bummer." The drunk Su Shao squinted his eyes and smiled. He was already tongue-tied. "I heard from the teacher that before the great general was conferred the title of prince, you came to the capital to confer a reward. After the court was dismissed, you knocked on the hat of a big shot from the Ministry of War and said that I, Su Shao, only had 600 to 700 men. In your eyes, I'm not even worth a fart. When I have 6,000 to 7,000 men in my hands, whether I can see you or not depends on your mood. When I have 60,000 to 70,000 men in my hands, you call me brother on the surface, but behind my back you still call me a stupid old ruffian. In the end, I accidentally gained control of 200,000 to 300,000 soldiers and destroyed 6 countries. I even killed 4 emperors. What do you think? Today, I will call you elder brother. But do you dare to accept, haha, great general, oh great general, as a martial artist of the younger generation? I, Su Huang, also hope to be able to gallop on the battlefield like you, and settle my grudges as I please. Su Fengyan saw the questioning gaze from the Treasury Department and said helplessly in a low voice, "This is just a rumor spread by the officials of Liang. There's no such thing. If there really was such a thing, Su Xiao would have bragged to me hundreds of times." Chang Sui also went crazy from the alcohol. The great general is indeed formidable, but how could Li Yishan, who relied on the scholar's strength to assist the great general, ultimately helping Northern Liang fight Northern Mang alone, be inferior in the slightest? It's a pity that Li Yishan is already dead. Otherwise I, Chang Sui, would be willing to become his errand boy. It's a pleasure to be able to chat with him. Lu Duanmao looked around in a daze. The wine in the cup in his hand had already spilled, but he was still muttering to himself, "Where's the wine cup? Where's the wine cup?" Sima Can slammed the table and replied, "Isn't the cup on the ground? I saw it under the table just now." The half-drunk Treasury Department reached out to touch his forehead. Couldn't these brothers have a little bit of the restraint of scholars? It was fine when they were in Shangyin Academy, but why were they so unrestrained in Beiliang, a place they were unfamiliar with? Su Fengyan smiled and said, "It seems that our Beiliang's green ant wine is still the best." At dusk, in the end, Chang Sui and the others still didn't let Su Fengyan send them up the mountain. They supported each other as they staggered towards Xiang Palace. However, Chang Sui didn't forget to shamelessly ask for the northern cold saber from Su Fengyan. Jean Bauscher laughed and said, "Senior apprentice brother definitely isn't drunk. Otherwise, every time he gets drunk, he would give people things. He definitely doesn't have the habit of asking people for things." Chang Sui glared and said, "Senior brother doesn't even want his life anymore. What's wrong with asking for a saber?" Then, he immediately muttered to himself drunkenly, "I don't want to think about sword chi soaring into the sky. At least I, Chang Sui, can fight like a bull when drunk." "Su Fengyan, you brat, you're not honest. Drinking depends on one's character. How can you be the only one sober when everyone is drunk? This won't do. I'll drink with you again tomorrow. Today's because my junior brothers and sisters were dragging us down." Jean Bauscher said unhappily, all right, we'll talk about it tomorrow when you can get the money from Mount Wudong." Su Fengyan smiled and said, "Then I won't see you off." Jean Bauscher nodded and said apologetically, "Sorry about that. Senior brother and the others are usually not like that." Su Fengyan shook his head and said, "People with temperament are the easiest to deal with. Beiliang's environment is only suitable for people like that." For some reason, Jean Bauscher slowed down his footsteps and turned to ask, "Is it really like the rumors at the border? That Dong Zhuo of Beimeng ordered Qi Manor, Sword Manor, and Yu Manor to set up the 3 great formations, chessboard, sword circle, and sitting stance? He even ordered the 100 over Kunlun slaves of Mount Bubang to control the ballista with power equivalent to a celestial sword. He even used the talisman formation One-Line Sky of Dao's sect and the Dunhuang flying apsaras of the princess's tomb, just to stop you from breaking the formation and advancing 200 steps?" Su Fengyan smiled and said, "After hearing what you said, I realized that it sounded very impressive. But actually, when I was breaking through the formation, I didn't think much of it. Moreover, I had dozens of Wu family swordsmen behind me to protect me." Jean Bauscher whispered, "I see." Su Fengyan smiled and didn't say anything. The woman turned around gently and said with a light voice, "Look at yourself. Look at your family. Look at your hometown. Look at your country. Look at your country. And look at the world. Look at everything one by one, leisurely and carefree." Su Fengyan frowned and fell into deep thought. As dusk approached, Su Fengyan returned to the front of the straw hut and cleaned up the mess. He moved the tables and chairs back into the house and then went to the back of the house to look at the vegetable garden. After squatting in front of the house for a while, he returned to the house and lit an oil lamp. He casually picked a martial arts manual that he had taken from the armory back then and slowly flipped through it. Late at night, Su Fengyan put down the book and walked out of the house. In the eyes of Tantai Pingjing and the other Qi refinement warriors, Great Peace City was rich with the aura of the king. Xiang Fan City was eerie with the aura of ghosts. Gangnam-do was elegant and bleak. Beiliang men couldn't compose frontier poems. Beiliang women also didn't have such grievances. Death was death. Su Fengnian looked up at the night sky. A general success was built on 10,000 corpses. What Su Xiao owed to Chun Xiu I'll repay. Su Xiao spent his entire life in the military. As a general, he could only kill people. There was no right or wrong. But no matter how many people he killed in the Central Plains, I, as his son, had to save that many people. And what I, Su Fengnian, owe the 300,000 cavalrymen and Beiliang citizens, I might not be able to repay in this lifetime. Chapter 1530. A huge fleet of carriages entered Beiliang's Yuzhou from Huainan's river prefecture and headed straight for Wudong Mountain. The fleet was escorted by the imperial guards who had dazzling golden threads wrapped around their scabbards. There were also nearly 20 inner palace experts who had copper-embroidered fish pouches around their waists. Behind this group of carriages, there was another group of luxurious carriages following far behind. The coachmen driving the carriages were, without exception, top-notch martial artists with long chi auras. It was the time when Liang destroyed Buddhism and promoted Taoism. In the north and south of the Yangtze River, there were new Taoist temples rising from the ground in all the geographical centers and spiritual mountains. The sound of immortal music resounded throughout the Central Plains. Among them, Xingyang Temple in Great Peace City was built like a forbidden palace. There were statues of the 5 emperors, including ancestor Taizong of Liang. They were placed on both sides of the statues of the Taoist saints according to the ancient order of Li Zhao and Mu. They took the materials from the iridescent cloud pavilion of the imperial palace and used them to build the gate of Xingyang Temple. They broke the inner palace's sweet spring hall and used it to build the hall of Laojun. The projection wall of the temple was painted with a grand system of 36 heavenly caves and 72 blessed lands of Taoism. For a time, Xingyang Temple became the head of all the Taoist temples in the world. The head of the temple, Wu Lingsu, was the Taoist who personally sealed the gate of the 2 Zen temples. She was now worthy of being the head of the Northern Taoist temple. Therefore, there was a saying in the world, Xingyang Temple in the capital, ancestral court in the north and south. Just when everyone knew that the white-robed monks of the 2 Zen temples were going to debate with the Taoist priests of Wudong on Lotus Peak, there was another news that the Yui minister who was like the sun in the sky in Great Peace City was going to rush to Beiliang's Wudong Mountain as the head of the imperial court with an imperial edict in his hand. He was going to confer the title of Wudong's supreme leader, Huang Manshan, as a void-pierce master. A middle-aged Taoist with an otherworldly aura was sitting in the carriage. He wore a purple-gold Taoist robe and had a purple horsetail whisk with 3 golden rings on his arm. He was smiling faintly. Beside the honorable Taoist sat a young man who looked very similar to him. Although he was also wearing a Taoist robe, he was closer to the secular world than the middle-aged Taoist. The young man said with a smile, "Father, I thought that after crossing the river province boundary marker, the Yuzhou military would at least send out a few hundred cavalries to intimidate us. It seems that Sugai isn't completely lawless. He's still very wary of father." The middle-aged Taoist was none other than Wu Lingsu, who had risen rapidly in Jing. He remembered that when he had just arrived at Great Peace City, the nobles of the city all liked to use his title of Qingqing King to make fun of him. Occasionally, when they met at a banquet, who did not call him Wang Yi, but did not bother to disguise the disdain in their eyes. Fortunately, the bitter days were over very quickly. He had failed to live up to expectations at Mount Longhu and was repeatedly tormented by the young man surnamed Su. A certain mysterious Taoist who lived in seclusion at Mount Longhu had died and his Tao had vanished. This even angered the previous emperor and the new emperor. In addition, Liang was an irresistible trend. Finally, Wu Lingsu was able to transform into a dragon as soon as he encountered the wind and cloud. He forcefully stepped on Mount Longhu and the 2 Zen temples to reach the peak of power. Among all this, his wife in name had secretly taught him. Although the two had not actually been husband and wife, even though Wu Lingsu had become the head of Taoism in the northern lands, he still held her in awe. Wu Lingsu glanced at his only son, Wu Shizhen, and felt somewhat dissatisfied. He, the official prefect of Chongxian of the court, had gone to Mount Wudong to issue an imperial edict. What was this brat pulling in a bunch of Great Peace City wastrels to follow behind him? That first young master Wang Yuanran, his old man Wang Xiongui had already been pushed from the position of Minister of Revenue to the position of Administrator of the Guangling Path. First my ass. If it wasn't for the fact that Tantanon still remembered the incense from the spring of Yonghui, with Wang Yuanran's shrewdness and ability, he would have long been eaten to the bone. There were also the other 3 young masters of Jing. Which one of them had any real weight? That pervert surnamed Yen at least had the famous general grandfather Yen Jinchuan. Even if Great Peace City did not give face to the monk, they would still give face to the Buddha. They would more or less not bicker with this brat. But that little fatty called Song Tianbao, none of his ancestors had ever been an official or studied. He just relied on his father's wealth to spend money in Jing. Every day he was a sucker for other people. He was just a silly little fool. Could this kind of rootless wealth last long? It was just a 100-jong tall building built on sand. When the wind blew, it could collapse at will. Wu Lingsu said earnestly, "Shizhen, in my opinion, the sons of the aristocratic families in the capital are also divided into 3, 6, and 9 ranks. For example, although Wang Yuanran's father, Wang Xiongui, was demoted from a first-class official to the most dangerous position, the administrator, in the future, the 6 ministries will serve outside the capital for a few years before returning to the capital. As the only remaining pillar of Zhonglu, it is a good thing that one person cannot support the situation. Wang Xiongui may have a chance to make a comeback. Wang Yuanran also has Tantanon to take care of him. Father will not oppose you getting to know him, but compared to the eldest son of Yin Maochun, Yin Chongging, and the only son of the Assistant Minister of Justice, Han Lin, Han Xingyan, Wang Yuanran is much worse. He can't even compare to Fan Zhongho, Li Jifu, and Gao Tingshu. As for that Yen family brat who doesn't amount to anything, his family is just like a half-dead person hanging on by a breath. That is why you... Let's talk about Zhao Wenwei, Yin Chongging, and Han Xingyan. These 3 people's fathers were all Grand Secretary Zhang's favorite students, and then they had the foresight to part ways a long time ago. The father's generation has a good official reputation. The younger generation's reputation isn't bad either. Even if I try to stick hot face to cold buttocks, they might not necessarily agree. Even if I thicken my skin and enter their homes, I still won't be able to become their close friend or confidant. Rather than this type of futile effort, I might as well spend a bit more effort on people like Wang Yuanran. Wu Lingsu sighed and said, "Small matters. It is hard to accomplish great things." Wu Shizhen said with a bitter face, "I actually want to get close to that Chen Xiaobao, but he doesn't even give you, father, face, so why would he pay me any attention?" Wu Lingsu reached out a hand to stroke the horsetail whisk's vermilion silk, saying softly, "Us father and son's foundation is still a bit shallow." Wu Shizhen leaned over to this new leader of Northern Taoism, saying with a low voice, "Father, if we can take advantage of this opportunity to trample on that surnamed Su and return to the capital, Father's position in His Majesty's heart will definitely rise a step further. Taking a step back, I can find an opportunity to secretly push Wang Yuanran and the other hotheads out to make a feud with Bailiang. Once they return to the capital and make a ruckus, the Su family's reputation in the capital will be completely ruined." Wu Lingsu was hesitant. That person even dares to refuse an imperial edict, and this is also his territory. How can Wang Yuanran and the others shake him in the slightest? As for the curses of Great Peace City's officialdom, the Su family father and son have never paid them any attention. Be careful not to smash your own foot with a rock. Bailiang's whisk water room spies can fight with Liang's Zhao Go for many years without being at a disadvantage. They cannot be underestimated. Wang Yuanran and the others can't accomplish anything. I don't think they will succeed. Wu Shizhen said with a smile, "I don't expect that Su person to be hurt. It's also good to disgust him." Wu Shizhen remembered the scene of him being humiliated by that peer at Mount Qingcheng. His tone was dark as he said, "Even if Su person has some information that he can use against him, would he really dare to kill over such a small matter?" Wu Lingsu suddenly asked, "In the group behind us, the one surnamed Lu, the son of the county chief of Hezhou, said that he used a scabbard to hit Su person in the past. Is that true?" Wu Shizhen said with schadenfreude, "It's most likely true. According to what Lu Chengfeng said, Su Fengyan was traveling the Jianghu with an old servant. They passed by Hezhou and had a conflict on the street. In the end, he used the scabbard of a cold blade to smash Su Fengyan's forehead. That guy also said that Su Fengyan threatened to bring 10,000 Bailiang cavalry to raise Hezhou. So Lu Chengfeng asked him who he was, and Su Fengyan asked him back, "Su Xiao is my father. Who do you think I am?" Lu Chengfeng, of course, did not believe him. After hitting Su Fengyan with the scabbard, he simply pulled out his blade and chased after him for half a street. Last year, I heard from the storytellers in the restaurants in the county that Su Fengyan was His Royal Highness. He really did travel the Jianghu with an old servant by long. He was scared to death, especially when Su Fengyan refused to accept the imperial edict and sent the Yuzhou cavalry to invade Hezhou. Not only Lu Chengfeng, but also his father and his whole family ran out of the city. Afterwards, when they saw that the Yuzhou cavalry had no intention of invading Hezhou, they returned to the county with fear. Wu Lingsu also found it interesting and said with a smile, "But later, wasn't there an incident where 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry entered Jizhou? They had to pass through Hezhou." Wu Shizhen laughed so hard that tears almost came out of his eyes. So the family resumed their old business and ran away at night. Fortunately, the Yuzhou cavalry returned through Heluku, so Lu Chengfeng's father did not resign and moved to Jiangnan. However, the Lu family also benefited from the disaster. The entire Hezhou knew about this hero who dared to beat up the king of Bailiang. Even Lu Chengfeng's father received a unique, above-average in Hezhou in the local evaluation hosted by Yin Maochun. Lu Chengfeng and Song Tianbao are good friends who have known each other for many years. When he was welcoming Wang Yuanran and the others, he fell in love at first sight with the daughter of the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. Plus, he was probably sure that Su Fengyan would not lower himself to his level, so he shamelessly followed him to Yuzhou. Wu Lingsu, who was no longer a self-proclaimed king in a corner, sneered. It is rumored that Song Tianbao's grandfather, as the #1 god of fortune in the two Liao provinces, was not on good terms with Su Xiao, who rose in Jinzhou in Liaodong. Lu Chengfeng and Wang Yuanran, who had a conflict with Su Fengyan in the Jizhou embassy in the capital, are indeed birds of a feather flock together. Wu Shizhen's expression was a bit awkward. It seemed that he had to be included. Chapter 1531. The first round of the debate between Buddhism and Taoism was going to be held at Lotus Peak tomorrow. There were no more places to stay on Mount Wudong. The inns in the towns near the foot of the Southern Divine Path were also full. The two groups of people entered a place called Escape Summer Town. The way they looked for rooms to rest was completely different. One group of a dozen people spent a lot of effort to negotiate with a small inn on the east side of the town. The normal rooms were much more expensive than first-class rooms in the Central Plains. When the innkeeper took the stack of travel passes, he just glanced at them and ignored them. So what if they came from Great Peace City? Wouldn't they still be slaughtered by our inn? However, the names of these guests were not vulgar. The middle-aged man with the sword was Qi Jiajie. It was Yin Chongging and Zhao Chunyuan, a young couple who looked like a perfect match. The handsome young man was called Zhao Wenwei. The two scholars in green were called Han Xingyan and Gao Shilian. The rest of them looked like retainers and servants. Their parents didn't pay much attention to their names. The other group of 20 or so people went directly to the best inn in Escape Summertown. When they heard that it was full, one of them threw down 500 taels of silver without hesitation, saying that he wanted to book the entire inn. The old innkeeper was annoyed by the young people's bureaucratic tone. He thought, so what if it's 600 taels? My inn is charging 100 taels a day according to the market price. You people want to stay for 3 days. 500 taels is nothing. The innkeeper rolled his eyes and said that the inn was doing business. There was no rule to chase away customers. The young man with the River Province accent took out another 500 taels without saying anything. The innkeeper reached out and touched the thick stack of brand new banknotes. He began to feel conflicted. The young man waved his hand as if he was afraid that others didn't know that he was rich. His helper immediately threw out 2 large gold ingots. The innkeeper looked and thought, silver is the father and gold is the lord. Since we're meeting these elders, let's not talk about manners. However, the innkeeper still wanted a yard after taking an inch. He said that the 30 or so guests were all staying. He was afraid that the staff wouldn't be able to get them to move. As soon as he said this, a few people reached out and grabbed the hilts of their swords. The innkeeper was anxious and hurriedly told them not to fight. Whoever dares to cause trouble in Bailiang today will be finished. The innkeeper picked up the banknotes and gold ingots and went upstairs to explain to the customers. The innkeeper played a petty trick. Not only did he take the initiative to return the money, he even gave everyone 3 to 4 taels of silver. He even told the customers that a group of military lords from the northern Liang border wanted to stay here, and that the innkeeper could not afford to offend them. Jianghu. Bailiang. Jianghu. 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 To Bailiang. Qi Jiajie. He was the number 1 swordsman in the capital. In his early years, he was not only the sword master of many princes. Even Bai Yan's daughter, Zhang Gaoxia, was once his disciple. To be able to trouble him to escort a group of people thousands of miles away, the reason was simple. If any one of these young people were thrown into Jiangnan, they would all be people that high officials and nobles would do their best to curry favor with. This was because their family elders were the deputy of the head of the secretariat, Qi Yanglong, the former minister of appointments, Yin Maochun, the former number 1 prime minister, Gao Shizhi, the Duke of Yen, and Han Lin, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. Among them, Yin Maochuan's eldest son, Yin Chongging, and Zhao Yuling's second daughter, Zhao Chunyuan, were husband and wife. The fathers of both families had strongly opposed it. In the end, the emperor, who was only the 4th prince at the time, set them up and married. It was a beautiful story in the capital. Zhao Wenwei, who had the reputation of being a child prodigy, was Zhao Yuling's favorite son. Han Xingyan was the second son of Assistant Minister of Justice, Han Lin, who was about to be sent out and promoted to administrator of Huainan. He was about to marry a virtuous county princess. Gao Shilian and Gao Shiqing were the son and daughter of Gao Shizhi, the Duke of Yen, in his later years. They had always been doted on by the Duke. Fortunately, the brother and sister had always kept a low profile in Great Peace City. Gao Shilian and the son of Great Pillar State Gu Jiantang were close friends, while Gao Shiqing and Zhao Chunyuan were close friends who had played together since childhood. It could be said that these young people were the most outstanding children of officials in Liang's officialdom. The provincial governor of Huainan province was Kai Nan, who used to be Gu Jiantang's most trusted general. Han Lin was about to be promoted to administrator of Huainan province, so they would have a lot of dealings in the future. Gao Shilian and Gu Jiantang's 2 sons were also very close. There were many things that the big shots could not sit at the same table and talk cheerfully, and it was even impossible for them to have a tacit understanding. However, if a junior who did not see the big picture came forward, it would be much smoother. At this time, they were all gathered in Yin Chongging's room. The window just so happened to be facing the street. Han Xingyan stood at the window and looked at the Bailiang cavalry slowly passing by on the street. He smiled and said, "Just by watching a leaf fall, you can tell that the Bailiang frontier army is really terrifying." Gao Shiqing joked, "Oh, now that you're the son of a second-rank administrator, your guts have grown by quite a bit. You even dare to say good things about Bailiang?" Han Lin raised both his hands, indicating that he was willing to be beaten and scolded. Gao Shilian could not help but feel indignant for Han Lin. He stared and said, "You talk without thinking. How can you marry?" Gao Shiqing glared back at him and said, "Shut up." Gao Shilian muttered his catchphrase in a low voice. "Having a sister like this, I'm really out of luck." Gao Shiqing, who yearned for chivalry the most, fiercely pressed down on the hilt of his sword and threatened, "Are you looking for a beating?" Yin Chongging, who was the oldest and the most mature in the group, said helplessly, "You can drink tea, but if you want to quarrel, go outside." Zhao Chunyuan, who was brewing tea, waved at Gao Shiqing. Zhao Wenwei, who was still a teenager, asked with a laugh, "Brother-in-law, why did Wang Yuanran and the others arrive at the foot of Mount Wudong before the Wu family's master Taoist?" Yin Chongging softly revealed the secret. Master Wu deliberately slowed down his pace and waited until the last day of the Lotus Peak debate before ascending the mountain to issue the imperial edict. The reason why he was in such a hurry before was because he was afraid that the Yuzhou army would come out to obstruct him, so he missed the best opportunity. Since the Yuzhou army has not made any moves, he can take it easy. The small town was so small that one could see the scene in the west from the east just by sticking one's head out of the window. Han Xingyan frowned. It seems that Wang Yuan ran and the others are stirring up trouble again. It's fine if they're in the capital, but why won't they stop when they're in Beiliang? Yin Chongging said calmly, "Let them be." Gao Shilian leaned against the window and glanced out. He angrily sneered. They're making quite a scene. As expected of the capital's 4 young masters traveling together, they're full of style. This bunch of vermin lying on their father's books of merit. It's one thing to enjoy a good life, but they still want to harm others. If they become high officials in the future, what else can they do besides bring disaster to the country? Yin Chongging frowned. Be careful with your words. Gao Shiqing made a face at her brother. Did you hear that? Big brother Yin also wants you to shut up. Gao Shilian put his palms together and silently muttered, Heavens! Oh heavens! Hurry up and throw down a man to marry this girl. Zhao Wenwei stuck out his chest. Second brother Gao? What do you think of me? Am I worthy of Sister Gao? The corner of Gao Shilian's mouth twitched. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Gao Shiqing slapped the child's head. This old lady changed your diapers in the past. Yin Chongging smiled. All right, don't make a fuss. Sit down and drink some tea. This is one of the few tales of spring deity lake tea we have. Chapter 1532. As soon as Gao Shiqing sat down, she immediately stood up and giggled. No, only a fool would not join in the fun. I have to go to the other side of the town to take a look. As she said this, Gao Shiqing carefully looked at Yin Chongging, who always spoke softly but was the most decisive. Yin Chongging raised his head to look at her and slowly said, We agreed in the capital that it would not happen more than 3 times. It has already happened twice in the capital and Jinan. If it happens again, you have to return to the capital immediately. Gao Shiqing smiled brightly and said, Understood. Gao Shiqing ran out of the inn like a wisp of smoke and ran along the street to the most popular inn in the town. She did not go too close. After all, she was not unfamiliar with Wang Yuan Ran, Yen Se Fetus, and Song Pandun, especially since the Yen family residence where Yen Se Fetus lived was their neighbor. Gao Shiqing respected old General Yen Jinchuan very much, but she hated this eldest grandson of the Yen family who was upright at the top but crooked at the bottom of the tree. After old General Yen sacrificed his life for the country, an exception was made. During this period of time, Yen Se Fetus's tail was raised to the sky. He actually had the guts to ask the elders of the family to propose marriage to the Duke Yen family. Gao Shiqing almost couldn't help but find someone to put this guy in a sack and throw him to the bottom of the lake. In Gao Shiqing's vision, Yen Se Fetus did not disappoint. After coming to a small town like Beiliang, he still flirted with good people. He was currently surrounded by 2 young women with a group of bad friends. Gao Shiqing was a little surprised. Didn't people say that women in Beiliang were mostly tall and strong? The 2 young women in front of her were very beautiful. The young woman who carried a sword like her was probably above average and could not be considered stunning. However, the other one was quite outstanding. The brothel of Great Peace City was known to be filled with outstanding beauties. Gao Shiqing had disguised herself as a man a few times to go there to broaden her horizons. Even those courtesans did not have the moving beauty of the tall woman in front of her, especially her unapproachable aura. As long as it was a man who wanted to win, he could not help but challenge her. No wonder Yen Se Fetus jumped out in such a hurry. However, Wang Yuanran was not present. He should be hiding in the inn overlooking the street. Yen Se Zun gently twirled the sandalwood fan in his hand and chuckled. Big brother is a scholar, and has never done unscrupulous things like snatching common women. But Big Brother is naturally hospitable. I just want to invite you 2 sisters into my building to drink tea, recite poems at night, and admire the moon. Big Brother is from the capital, and has long been curious if the moon in the northwest is as round as the moon in Great Peace City. Sisters, it shouldn't be difficult for you to give me some face, right? The woman with the sword was so angry that she laughed. Give me face my ass. Yen Se-zun laughed and said, You're really shrewish. So it's a wild horse from the northwest. Big brother likes it a lot. The woman with the sword was about to draw her sword and slash at the man when her companion pulled her back. It turned out that a group of Bailiang's most notorious Jin cavalry had already rushed over. The rider, who looked like a sergeant, asked in a deep voice, What's the matter? The sword-wielding woman pointed at Yen Se-fei and his group of young masters and said angrily, Hedonistic sons of rich parents from the capital, in broad daylight you want to. Yen Se-zun innocently interrupted the woman's words. What do you want? I didn't do anything, I just chatted for a bit. The Jin cavalry sergeant's face was gloomy. His palm subconsciously pressed against the handle of his Bailiang saber at his waist and looked down at the group of young men from the capital. Then are you done chatting? If you're done, then scram back to the inn. If you're not done, then continue. I'd like to listen in. Yen Se-zun, who had never been treated this way in the capital, gritted his teeth and smiled lightly. He turned his head and glanced at a young man standing beside Lu Chengfeng. That young man braced himself and took 2 steps forward. He squeezed out a smile and said to the Jin cavalry sergeant, My father is the old governor of Yozhou's Huanggang County. My big brother is the former 8-pass commandant. We're all on the same side. The Jin cavalry sergeant said expressionlessly, Even the current governor of Huanggang County can't control me, let alone the previous governor of Huanggang County. As for the 8-pass commandants, they're just miscellaneous, right? Nowadays, even miscellaneous generals don't count in Bailiang. So what's the 8-pass commandants? On the same side. Who the F***CK is on the same side as you. Seeing this scene, Gao Shiqing was a little dumbfounded. If this was Li Yongbia's place, the local tyrant's son would have appeared, and that petty official would have to bow and scram obediently. It wouldn't be strange for him to cling to the powerful and become the villain's accomplice. The Jin cavalry sergeant turned his head and smiled at the 2 Bailiang women. Are you 2 ladies looking for a place to rest? If you can trust me, I know of a Yuting Inn on the other side of the street. There might be 1 or 2 rooms left, but the price isn't cheap. There's no helping it. The rooms left in the inn's hands are all superior rooms that they've decided to rip off. If you 2 ladies have enough money, you can consider it. The woman with the sword smiled and said, Brother, thank you. The Jin cavalry sergeant glanced at the group of unfriendly bastards from the capital and said softly to the 2 women, I'll send you off. At this moment, a tall young man next to Yen Sedan sneered and said, Bailiang barbarians. The Jin cavalry sergeant, who had already turned his horse around, suddenly pulled on the reins and dismounted. He said to the other sergeant, Ma Biao, you guys take these 2 ladies to the Yuting Inn. This squad leader took off his light armor and cold saber and hung them on the horse's back. Then he turned around and stared at the young man who had called them barbarians of northern Liang. He limped forward and said, I have taken off my armor and cold saber from my pottery cart. Today I am not a brocade horseman on duty. The tall young man laughed and said, What, King cripple? You want to fight me one-on-one? I'm afraid I'll accidentally use too much strength and break your other leg. The man surnamed Tao laughed. If you can kill me, it'll just be because you're capable. The tall young man curled his finger. In the hut not far from the elephant washing pool, Su Fengyan was moving books and drying them. Suddenly, the Yuzhou lieutenant and the spy leader of the Fu Shuifang appeared together. Su Fengyan, who was squatting with a book open, raised his head and smiled. If you have something to say it. The leader of the spies spoke very quickly, but his words were clear. Reporting to Wang Ye, at the foot of the mountain in Fuxia town, 64 Jin cavalry and 27 Fu Shuifang death warriors are confronting 23 people led by Wang Yuanran, the youngest son of Guangling's Dean of Dao. The cause is, Su Fengyan waved his hand and ordered the lieutenant, Luo Hongkai, go down the mountain and lead 500 men to Fu Shuifang. Don't confront them, just fight to the death. Su Fengyan pondered for a moment and then continued, The other side should have quite a number of martial art masters as bodyguards. Sui Taizhan, you take out the 4 A-class Fang Fushui men of sacrifice currently on Mount Wudong and send them down the mountain with Captain Luo. Luo Hongkai asked carefully, Your Highness, are we really going to fight to the death? Su Fengyan smiled. How can we do that? Su Fengyan quickly added, Just beat them half to death. After this matter, people will give a thumbs up to Bailiang for treating guests with courtesy. The 2 men quickly left. Luo Hongkai rubbed his chin and said, Old Sui, our prince is indeed a scholar, right? Sui Taizhan said unhappily, What's the use of telling me this? Why didn't you flatter him in front of the prince? Luo Hongkai, who was striding forward, rolled his eyes and said, Just say yes or no? Sui Taizhan wiped his mouth and smiled. Of course. Chapter 1533. Escape Summer Town. Escape Summer Town. Escape Summer Town. Just from its name, one would feel refreshed. However, at this time it was very angry. In reality, of Wang Yuanran's group, in terms of appearance, other than the grandson of the old General Yan Jinchuan, who looked like a villain, the rest of the group, including the tall young man who had seriously injured the captain of the Jin cavalry, only had a slightly arrogant attitude. They did not look like villains with a belly full of evil tricks. The 4 silent elders of the family also had the style of a great master. On the side of Bailiang, there were more than 60 patrolling Jin cavalry on the streets of the small town. They all wore light armor and only carried cold knives. They did not carry bows or crossbows. The Jin cavalry captain, who was in charge of the affairs of the 3 towns at the foot of Wudong Mountain, Escape Summer Town, had a sturdy body. However, he had a pair of small eyes. When he squinted, they seemed to disappear from his face. He supported the captain of the Jin cavalry, whose chest was full of blood. The latter had been punched in the chest by the tall young man and flew back several feet on the street. It was clear that he had suffered serious internal injuries. Without 2 or 3 months of recovery, he would not be able to do anything on duty. The reason the Jin cavalry captain did not act on impulse and order the 60 brothers who had accompanied him to attack the enemy was because the enemy had many hidden aces. Even with the help of the Fu Shuifang spies, they might not be able to gain an advantage. In addition, the young man who had injured the captain had already announced his identity. He was the son of Liang's Sagxing field captain. Sagxing field captain was one of the 4 field captains in the capital and had real power. His rank was not very high, but he was a strong candidate for the 12 great generals of Liang's 4 campaigns, 4 garrisons, and 4 pacifications. The commandant of the imperial cavalry, who had just turned 30 years old, was a descendant of a general of northern Liang. He had long been influenced by the filth of the hedonistic circle and was very familiar with it. When there was trouble, the main character would generally not come out and make a ruckus. He felt that it was beneath him and needed a handy henchman to stand up for him. The young man whose father was the shooting sound commandant belonged to this group. To be able to have such a good general of Great Peace City act as a helper, the other young masters who did not show any fear in the face of more than 60 Bailiang cavalry had to have a high status. This imperial cavalry commandant's immediate superior was the Horned Eagle commandant Luo Hongkai, who was in charge of the military affairs of the 3 nearby counties. Commandant Luo had long since left a ruthless message that this time, the conflict between Buddhism and Taoism held by Lotus Peak was related to Bailiang's face. Those who came to Mount Wudong to join in the fun were either officials or scholars. Those young ladies were all delicate young ladies from respectable families. They were all timid and couldn't withstand the torment. When you see these people, you bunch of rough men should be more amiable. It's best if you give them a smile. When you need to give them directions, you should speak nicely and not be impatient. In short, if any bastard dared to embarrass Bailiang in front of outsiders, then he, Luo Hongkai, would make him lose a few layers of skin. The imperial cavalry commandant was in a difficult position. Although he only needed to say one word and this Fuxia town would really start fighting, and if the 60 imperial cavalry couldn't win, there were still Commandant Luo's 2,000 elite soldiers at the foot of Mount Wudong. However, since he was the commandant in charge of 200 imperial cavalry, he couldn't be so impulsive. If he beat up the son of a shooting sound commandant, then so be it. If there were one or two sons of court generals with the surname Jinping, or if he accidentally crippled the sons of high officials of the 6 ministries, then the matter would blow up. In the end, would the king really have to personally clean up after them? However, the imperial cavalry commandant was sullen and angry. Thinking about this group of bastards who had come from Great Peace City to show off their strength, it was fortunate that they weren't Beimang barbarians. Otherwise, he wouldn't have to be so hesitant. Today's matter was clearly started by the nobles of Jingdo. Wu Zhangtao's ox cart was already tolerating enough. If he had been the one to see that scene, he probably would have pulled out his sword and chopped them down without another word. Who dares to bully the women of Beiliang? Wang Yuanran let out a soft breath. Fortunately, the commandant was someone who understood the big picture. Otherwise, if the two sides really started fighting without any regard for the consequences, then his secret plan would not be easy to clean up. Wang Yuanran's gaze swept over the people around him. He saw the subtle expressions of his companions. Yan Tongshu's body trembled slightly. There was both the fear of facing the legendary Beiliang soldiers and also the excitement. The entire Great Peace City was cursing him for being a lecher who couldn't be supported. It was the famous General Yan Jinchuan of the spring and autumn period who had killed too many people and committed too many crimes that he had received retribution. This was why he had such a useless grandson to support the face of the Yan family. However, if he, Yan Tongshu, could safely return to Jingdo this time, who wouldn't say that he was a hero who dared to fight the Beiliang army? Who would dare say that he was a coward? The son of the shooting commandant Li Shogua, Li Zhongliang, was in charge of guarding the northern part of Jingdo. The most famous person in Jingdo wasn't the high-ranking commandant Li, but Li Zhongliang's brother Li Chang'an. He was only in his early 30s and was already a corps general among the permanent generals of Liang. More importantly, Li Chang'an was a 4th-rank general and was one of the first generals promoted by the emperor after he ascended the throne. Li Zhongliang himself had followed Yang Xinxing and Yang Huchen's Jizhou army down south to quell the rebellion last year. Unfortunately, the Yang army was defeated one after another and became the laughingstock of all the civil and military officials. Other than the peerless General Yang Huchen who had lost an arm, no one in this army was rewarded for their contributions, regardless of whether or not they had achieved anything. Li Zhongliang, who had personally taken the heads of more than a dozen West Chu rebels on the battlefield, also fell silent because of this. Why would Li Zhongliang act today for Yan Tongshu, whom he had always looked down on? The loyalty of a friend? That was underestimating Li Zhongliang, whose father and brother were both heroes. Before this person left Jingdo, his family had been secretly trying to help him enter the Duoyan elite cavalry that the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Tang Taizhuang, had built in Liaodong. However, Assistant Minister Tang had always been vague about this. He said that now that he didn't lead troops, his words might not be useful. Who would believe that? In the 2nd year of Shangfu, the Duoyan elite cavalry that had won a number of small battles on the border should be called the elite cavalry of the Tang family, right? However, in order to avoid suspicion, the Tang family was afraid that Tang Taizhuang, would attract criticism in the Ministry of War. So the new commander of the 16,000 Duoyan elite cavalry used a border general whose surname wasn't Tang. However, that guy was slowly promoted from a sergeant to a commander by Tang Taizhuang. As long as Li Zhongliang made a statement in Beiliang today, Tang Taizhuang, who was Gu Jiantong's right-hand man along with Kai Nan, would understand without needing Li Zhongliang to say anything in Great Peace City. A Duoyan elite cavalry that everyone was jealous of was already a lieutenant. Wouldn't that be in Li Zhongliang's pocket? Song Tianbao seemed to stare dumbly at that tall Beiliang beauty. Wang Yuanran laughed coldly inside. Learning from Yan Tongshu and pretending to be a pervert? That Yan Tongshu had brought 3,000 taels of gold into Jingdo last year. In just half a year, he had squandered it all. Just for Yan Tongshu alone, he had bought the first spring of several young courtesans in Great Peace City. You fatty, you can't even forget your friends when you see a beauty, so don't pretend to forget your life when you see a beauty. In the 2nd year of Shangfu, you claim to have stolen 5,000 taels of gold from your father. Based on your father's shrewdness, not to mention stealing 5,000 taels of gold from Liaodong without anyone noticing, I'm afraid without his consent or tacit consent, You, kid, would have a hard time even stealing a single copper coin. Fatty song, ever since you entered Jingdo in this year, relying on my Wang Yuanran's, Yen Tongshu's, and the others' names, your father probably earned far more than 8,000 taels of gold. Wang Wani, the daughter of the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Wang Zhua, was famous in Jingdo. The old assistant minister had 8 sons. In the end, he had a daughter in his later years, so he gave his daughter this name. Wang Wani's appearance was passable, and her figure was very good. Unfortunately, her temperament was questionable. After all these years, how many poor scholars had she seduced that had the potential to become a carp jumping through the dragon's gate? Did she really think of herself as a fox immortal in a supernatural novel? Those poor scholars who could only stay in the temples in the suburbs of Jingdo, when they were reading at night, suddenly floated in from outside the window. Everyone was confused and infatuated. At this moment, Wang Wani was staring at the tall woman from the northern region, who looked like a real fox fairy descending to the mortal world, as if she was her enemy. Seeing that the situation was under control, Wang Yuanran became increasingly calm. His line of sight leaped over the Bailiang cavalry, discovering that Yin Chongging and the others had already arrived by Gao Shiqing's side. When Wang Yuanran saw these people, he obviously couldn't help but feel complicated. Last year, his father was still a minister who had the potential to take over Gu Lu's authority from Grand Secretary Zhang. However, even if his father wasn't transferred to the chaotic Guangling path, during that storm that shook Jingdo, after Wang Yuanran provoked Zhao Chunyuan and beat up Han Xingyan, he was still brought by his father to kneel outside Zhao Manor for half a day. Even now, Wang Yuanran still didn't feel like he was in the wrong. It was Zhao Chunyuan, this fickle woman, who had let down her childhood sweetheart first. In the end, she ran off to become the wife of that surnamed Yin, saying that she and Yin Chongging loved each other, that it was she who let down Wang Yuanran's brother who was publicly acknowledged as gentle and honest. In reality, wasn't it because she saw that the Yin family's future prospects were good, especially since Yin Maochun was going to take over her father's heavenly official position as Minister of Personnel? Zhao Yuling, this old man, had occupied the Ministry of Personnel for more than 10 years, grasping the authority to promote all of the officials under the heavens. Did he really not have a bit of shit under his seat? Could he really wipe it clean before heading to the Secretariat? If Wang Yuanran could, he wanted to run up to Zhao Chunyuan and give her a slap. Then, he would expose Han Xingyan's past in front of the Gao siblings. You brat, you only have this much prospects. You clearly love that Gao Shiqing, but you don't even dare to say it out loud. You can only obediently follow the matchmaker's words and marry that county princess Zhao. Wang Yuanran's relationship with Han Xingyan wasn't bad. Last year, when he punched Assistant Minister Han's son in the face, wasn't it also because he lamented over his son's misfortune and anger? In the end, Wang Yuanran's line of sight stopped on Yin Chongging's body. His gaze was exactly the same as the one Wang Wani looked at that Bailiang woman. Chapter 1534. Yin Chongging. What a great talent that everyone thought highly of. Benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, trust, gentleness, respect, frugality. It all seemed to be in one person. Was there really such a perfect young talent in the world? Wang Yuanran did not believe it, but from Zhao Yuling to Yuan Gua to Han Lin, and even Wang Yuanran's father Wang Xingui, this large group of Yong Hui's famous ministers who came from Gulu, who did not praise Yin Chongging. Wang Yuanran suddenly laughed. There really was someone who thought the same as him, and it was someone Yin Chongging wouldn't have guessed even if he was beaten to death. That was the important minister of the 3 dynasties of Liang, Tantanan, Huanwen. Wang Yuanran was afraid of many people in his life, but the only person he respected was Tantanan. So when Tantanan told him to go to the Imperial College to reflect on his mistakes, Wang Yuanran directly refused his mother's urging to stay and really went to the Imperial College to reflect on his mistakes. When Wang Yuanran was about to leave the Imperial College, there were already rumors that Tantanan intended to abdicate and that Zhao Yuling or Yin Maochun was very likely to enter the Menxia province. When the undercurrents were surging, the old man personally went to the Imperial College to see Wang Yuanran. Before leaving, Tantanan said something that Wang Yuanran thought he would never forget in his life. Brat, Being a person is like flipping through a book and reciting scriptures. Not to mention this old man whose neck is in the yellow earth. Even your father Wang Shenggui's age is half buried in the earth. He has almost flipped through the book to the end and can't find anything new. But a young man like you is different. There is an old saying that every family has its own difficult scriptures, but no matter how difficult it is, you should be sensible. You have to read it well and read it well. The reason why I'm talking nonsense with you is that when I was young, I was also like you, idling around. But the old saying that a prodigal who returns is more valuable than gold is not a lie. Of course, Wang Yuanran knew that the little Jinren Wu Shizhen had an ulterior motive. This was nothing. Not to mention those in the distance, just Li Zhongliang, Song Tianbao, and the others who were nearby were all smart people. Acting so rashly was all for the sake of getting what they needed. To be able to make it to their level, even the infamous Yen Tongshu wasn't a fool. Song Tianbao wanted to rely on Yen Tongshu's identity as Yen Jinchuan's grandson to raise his banner. Other than freeloading and sleeping with courtesans for a whole year, how much money had Yen Tongshu secretly earned for the Yen family who had always been cash-strapped? At least 200,000 taels. Otherwise, do you think old General Yan's posthumous body could pass the Board of Rights meeting so smoothly? The more he re-examined the people around him, the more Wang Yuanran began to understand that it was not easy for his father to become an official. Therefore, although Wang Yuanran could not help his father return to the capital as an important official, at the very least, he could win some reputation for his father. All of a sudden, a pleasant surprise came. Probably sensing the difficult situation of the Beiliang cavalry, as one of the parties involved, the Beiliang woman with a sword reported her identity. It turned out that her father was Song Yen, the son of the Lingzhou provincial governor. As the second-in-command of the civil officials in Lingzhou, he could be considered one of the top officials in Beiliang. Song Yan's daughter, Song Huangmei, pointed the tip of her sword at Li Zhongliang, the son of Colonel Shooting Sound, and said angrily, "Compared to officials, is that so? What's so great about your father's bullshit, Colonel?" Wang Yuanran could not help but laugh. Now that Beiliang had cut a large number of surplus generals and colonels, as long as they did not hold military power, they did not even have the right to hang the Beiliang saber when they went out. However, the colonel of Li Zhongliang's father, Li Shogua, was indeed quite amazing. He was now a fourth-rank official, comparable to Song Yan's Izhou. Furthermore, this Colonel Shooting Sound did not dare to say that he would immediately become one of the 4 generals of the 4th expedition, but as long as he operated it well, after 4 to 5 years of smooth sailing, he would definitely become one of the lower-ranked generals. Furthermore, his brother had a private nickname of Little Chun Wang in the Liang military circle. In front of Li Zhongliang, this Colonel Shooting Sound was still not enough. The pervert Yen Tongshu first snickered, and then laughed even more exaggeratedly. This hedonistic son of a rich family had the ability to make a man tremble. He held a fan in one hand and covered his heart with the other. "Brother, I'm scared to death." Yen Tongshu finally stopped laughing. He curled his lips and said, "Don't even talk about Izhou. The provincial governor is just SOSO." At this time, the cold and elegant woman who had been indifferent to the farce finally spoke. She turned her head and said softly to the commandant of the Imperial Cavalry, "My father is Administrator Li." The commandant of the Imperial Cavalry was stunned. The woman smiled sweetly and said softly, "Yes, I also have a younger brother called Li Hanlin. He is now the commandant of the Liangzhou crossbowmen." In the Beiliang military, whether it was the garrison troops or the border troops outside the Great Wall, most people had heard of the name Li Hanlin. It was even more effective than the number 1 civil official in Beiliang, Li Gongda. The commandant of the Imperial Cavalry smiled knowingly at first, but he became more and more conflicted. Today's matter was really not a matter of whether the two sides were high or low officials. He was an insignificant commandant of the Imperial Cavalry in Beiliang. It was not because he was worried about his background that he did not dare to give the order to beat those bastards into a pig's head. It was because the war at Liangmang was so intense that he, the only son of the Imperial Cavalry, had no chance to go to the border to kill the barbarians because his father and mother had dragged in all the elders of the family to pester him. However, His father had been a military officer at the Great Wall of Yuzhou and had always paid attention to the general situation. As the commandant, he knew quite a bit about the relationship between Beiliang and the Liang imperial court. The more this was the case, the more he could not make trouble for Commandant Luo or even the prince and implicate Beiliang in an even more dangerous situation. He turned his head to look at his subordinate, Sergeant Tao Che, who was unwilling to leave no matter what. Even this old brother of his knew the severity of the matter. He had taken off his armor and saber and was going to fight with Li Zhongliang as a Beiliang citizen. How could he act rashly? Tao Che was once a sergeant of the Beiliang crossbowmen. Like Li Hanlin, he was also an elite scout responsible for clearing the path for the Dragon Elephant cavalry up north. His left leg was severely injured in battle and he had no choice but to retire from the crossbowmen. According to the rules of the Beiliang Frontier Army, he could have served as a deputy in the local garrison. However, Tao Che refused no matter what, saying that he was an old cripple and that he would be satisfied if he could return to the local garrison as a sergeant. That one call of the Beiliang barbarians. For an old soldier who had probably spent half his life fighting the Beiliang barbarians to the death, it was too hurtful. The Imperial Cavalry Commandant Fan Xiangda lowered his head and said softly to his old brother who had returned from the Liangzhou border, "I'm sorry." Yan Tongshu opened his fan with a snap and smiled. What's the saying again? The temple is small and the wind is strong, but the water is shallow and there are many bastards. Who would have thought that I would be able to meet both the administrator and the daughter of the governor while casually strolling through the streets of this small town? What, you want to use your power to bully people? You want to use your private army to kill us good people? Wang Wani was instantly amused. Using power to bully people and good people, these two phrases coming out of Yan Tongshu's mouth really had a different flavor. Wang Yuanran and Li Zhongliang both had calm expressions. The more powerful the Beiliang side was, the more cheers they would receive in the capital in the future. However, the four experts beside them were a lot more nervous. With the combined strength of 2 master-level experts and 2 level 3 experts, not to mention 60 to 70 cavalry, even 200 to 300 cavalry wouldn't be a problem. However, if they really met the daughter of the Beiliang administrator, then it would be the same as angering the daughter of the Grand Secretary in the capital of Liang. At that time, it might alert the large-scale regular army here. Who started the bloody policy of Liang's 20 years of Jianghu? Wasn't it the old Liang prince Su Rantu? Moreover, it was said that the Su Fengnian who had just fought with Tuoba Bodhisattva was on Wudong Mountain right now. At that time, not to mention protecting the safety of these young masters and ladies, they might not even be able to protect themselves. Not far away, Gao Shiqing also smiled and said, "This Yan Tongshu isn't stupid to the extreme. This way, the Beiliang cavalry will either retreat with their tails between their legs, or they will have no choice but to use their power to bully people and kill innocent people." Gao Shirlian snorted coldly and said, "If I were the Imperial Cavalry Commandant, I wouldn't waste my breath. Even if I don't kill people, I would hang Yan Tongshu up and beat him up." Chapter 1535. Yin Chongging shook his head and said, "Northern Liang is in a dilemma. If we don't completely fall out with them, we won't be able to capture Yan Tongshu and the others with an army of at least 600 riders and a few martial experts protecting them." Gao Shirlian said unhappily. "To be able to make Beiliang suffer a setback once, won't they be treated as heroes when they return to the capital?" Yin Chongging smiled. "Let's go, we've seen the show. You guys really wasted that pot of Spring God Lake tea." At this time, the streets of the small town rumbled like thunder. Even Zhao Chunyuan felt a suffocating pressure. When a group of black-armored cavalry charged into the small town, there were constantly archers dismounting from their horses and climbing onto the roofs to occupy advantageous terrain. In this small town, there were no more than 400 to 500 soldiers on the streets and archers on the roofs, but they formed a black cloud that could destroy a city. The leading general took the lead, urging his horse to gallop to the side of the Jin Cavalry Commandant Fan Xiangda. Sitting high on the back of the Liangzhou horse, he angrily rebuked with a gloomy face, "Surnamed Fan, are you sunbathing here?" Fan Xiangda didn't know what to do. He was about to speak when the horned eagle Captain Luo Hongkai scolded, "Bastard! How can there be a Bailiang army that doesn't draw their sword when facing an enemy? If the prince hears this and knows that I raised a nest of bear soldiers, how can I still be a captain? Luo Hongkai looked around and said in a low voice, "Unrelated people, leave the streets. You will not be treated as an enemy if you're late." This Lieutenant Luo was probably really angry at that Fan Xiangda. But he was his trusted aide after all, so he left some face for the commandant of the brocade cavalry. He turned his head slightly and spat before suddenly raising his arm and saying in a clear voice, "Patrolling brocade cavalry, retreat. Hippogriff cavalry, get into formation. Draw your swords." Luo Hongkai stared darkly at the group of people and grinned out of habit. His teeth were especially white and frightening. If anyone escapes without reason, the archers will kill them on the spot. The streets of the small town weren't wide. Logically speaking, it wasn't suitable for cavalry to gallop through. However, it wasn't hard for a cavalry to charge through. It wasn't like they were going to collide with those orderly infantry formations, so they could do whatever they wanted. The Horned Eagle Captain Luo Hongkai had around 3,000 soldiers under his command. He only had 500 cavalry. He had always been very careful. He begged and asked his superiors for more than 800 B-grade warhorses from the Bailiang horse farm. In the local army, other than the first-class captains who guarded the dangerous passes, this was already a shocking achievement. For the captains of Yuzhou and Lingzhou, where most of the soldiers were infantrymen, to have 200 B-grade warhorses was already a miracle. Of course, the reason why Luo Hongkai was so capable was because the king of Bailiang had personally led 10,000 Yuzhou cavalry from Jibei to Hulu's mouth. Thanks to the prince, the Bailiang horse farm, which usually didn't pay much attention to the garrison troops in Liangzhou, had finally changed their view of the garrison troops in Yuzhou. Within the scope of their responsibility, they would give priority to warhorses to Yuzhou, which was never known for its cavalry. As for the captains of Lingzhou, they could forget about it. Who asked Yuzhou to have a Luandao who fought side by side with the prince? Do you have one in Lingzhou? Yan Tongshu was probably so scared that his legs had turned to jelly. His face was pale, and his lips were trembling. Even though the 4 experts who had quite a reputation in Liang Lake walked out and stood in front of them to protect them, this eldest son of the Yan family still couldn't help but tremble. This time, he was finally not as flirtatious as before. The son of the county chief of Hezhou, Lu Chengfeng, had a long face. He even had the thought of dying. "I just want to marry an assistant minister's daughter as my wife to bring honor to my ancestors. How can you Bailiang kill people just like that?" Li Zhongliang, who had experienced the toughness of the battlefield, was probably the calmest one among them. He was sizing up all the details of this regular army in Bailiang. The 2 local playboys of Bailiang who had joined the group to run errands for the rich and powerful in the capital almost turned around at the same time, wanting to escape into the inn. However, the middle-aged man who was acting as a guard instructor for the Li family suddenly reached out his hands and pulled the 2 back. Then 2 arrows flew through the air. If he didn't pull them back from the gates of hell, then the 2 pitiful creatures would have been nailed to the back by the arrows. If they were lucky enough to survive, they would be heavily injured. Wang Yuanran finally couldn't hold back and said angrily, "You Bailiang really dare to kill people on the street for no reason?" The Hippo Hawk captain, Luo Hongkai, didn't waste his breath on him and waved his hand. The cavalry started to charge. An old expert who was the stabilizing force behind the scenes in the Yan family attacked first. The old man was a true second-grade master. If it wasn't for the fact that he suffered a fatal injury on the battlefield when he was middle-aged and coughed nonstop every time it rained and even breathing was painful, the old man might have already been a first-grade King Kong or even a mysterious finger realm expert. After the old man was saved by Yan Jinchuan from the battlefield, he stayed in the Yan family to repay his kindness. In the capital, he had the nickname of Half-Chi River Crossing. It was said that although the old man had difficulty breathing when he was sick, when he was facing an enemy, his earth energy was extremely dense and he was also very skilled in martial arts. The old man faced a Hippo Hawk cavalry that charged at him, and he was just about to smash the warhorse's head with his palm when a wisp of a strange figure suddenly flashed out from the side. The figure's hands pushed lightly on his chest, and it actually pushed him back to where he stood on the spot. Just as the old man exhaled, He had no choice but to take another breath. The slightly wrinkled clothes on his chest trembled and returned to normal. He wasn't the only one. The other 3 experts from his camp all tried to block the rider's path, but they were all blocked by someone else. Even though the 8 of them clashed 4 times in the blink of an eye, each with their own advantages and disadvantages, this gap allowed the horned eagle rider to reach Yen Tongshu, who was standing at the outermost edge. When the rider brushed past Yen Tongshu, the northern cold saber that didn't seem to be swinging left a large wound on the shoulder of the stunned Yen family's eldest young master. Fortunately, Li Zhongliang pulled Yen Tongshu back. Otherwise, the wound would have been on Yen Tongshu's neck. After the first rider, there were still hundreds of riders coming from behind. Li Zhongliang, who didn't want to get too deeply involved, had no choice but to fight personally. He took 2 steps forward, bent his back and twisted his head to dodge the blade on the back of the horse. Then, he slammed his shoulder into the side of the warhorse, sending both the rider and the horse flying. However, the 3rd rider didn't give Li Zhongliang any chance to catch his breath. Li Zhongliang took a series of quick steps, turned around, and grabbed the rider's arm that was holding the blade. Li Zhongliang roared angrily and dragged the rider off the horse, throwing him towards the 4th rider. The latter didn't even put away his blade. Instead, he leaned his body to the right and dodged it. Then, he still managed to stab Li Zhongliang with his blade. Gao Shilian, who was following the crowd back to the inn, saw this scene. Although he wasn't part of the situation, he was still very worried. He said softly to Yin Chongqing, "Are we really going to leave like this? From the looks of it, this Bailiang cavalry really knows how to kill." Yin Chongqing hesitated and finally stopped. He looked at Li Zhongliang and the others in the distance, who were already in danger. His expression was heavy. The group stopped under the eaves. Gao Shiqing said angrily, "These Bailiang people are too much. How can they kill people on the street in front of so many people? Is there any justice in this world? Wang Yuanran is the son of an administrator. He didn't do anything heartless. How can the Bailiang cavalry just kill him like that?" Yin Chongqing didn't say anything. He knew that it was probably because of the sensitive identities of Wang Yuanran and the others that the Bailiang didn't hesitate to go to war. Under certain rules, the imperial court made things difficult for the Bailiang. The Bailiang could endure it, and had endured it for 20 years. However, the Bailiang couldn't be humiliated. The corner of Yin Chongqing's mouth lifted slightly. He walked out of the eaves and said softly to the window on the 2nd floor of the inn, "Thank you, Mr. Qi." The next moment, the streets of Escape Summertown were filled with sword qi. The coldness of the sword qi instantly made the name Escape Summertown more appropriate. However, before Gao Shiqing, Zhao Wenwei, and the others could sincerely sigh at Qi Jia's profound swordsmanship and magnificent sword qi, they suddenly felt a bone-piercing coldness come and go in a hurry. It was gone just like that. Then, without them noticing, a young man with a book in his hand was standing next to them. It was as if he had just been reading at home and didn't have time to relax before coming out to join in the fun. There was only a slight breeze on the streets of Escape Summertown. It wasn't enough to flip the pages of the book. However, Zhao Chunyuan and Gao Shiqing, who were more observant, saw that the young man had just turned a page of the book. Chapter 1536. A middle-aged man stepped over the threshold of the inn. Such a simple movement made Yin Chongqing and the others feel a breath like a spring breeze. The man was wearing a white robe with a jade belt. The sleeves were narrow and the body was wide. The robe was made of Sichuan brocade, a first-class tribute of the Liang dynasty. The collar and sleeves were inlaid with fine and delicate brocade with golden edges. The big part was simple and elegant, but the small part was noble. Probably only this kind of refined man with a hidden edge could marry the rouge girl with the reputation of peach blossom horse and pomegranate skirt when he was 20 years old. The middle-aged man had a long sword hanging from his waist. The scabbard was black and simple, as if it was made from the skin of a python. But what was really strange was that the sword did not have a sword guard or hilt. Qi Jiajie, the #1 swordsman in the capital. Since he was 9 years old, he started practicing with the family heirloom sword, Ban Xiang. In the past 30 years, he traveled north to the Tuliao provinces, south to Jianghuai, east to Zhenshi, west to Jianghe, and visited all the famous mountains and rivers in the world. During this period, Qi Jiajie changed to the sword Setting Sun at the age of 18. He challenged 6 grandmasters of the sword, including Dongyue Sword Pool suzerain Song Nianqing, Guangling Spring Snow Building's chief minister Chai Qingshan, and Tongxi Sword Saint Liu Baijie. He lost all 6 battles and returned to the capital for closed-door training. When he came out at the age of 26, he changed to the killing sword, Smelly Tang. At the border of Liaodong, he single-handedly fought 800 Beimang cavalry and retreated unscathed, chopping off more than 300 heads. At the age of 30, he changed to the sword Chongyu. It had no edge and no hilt, so if he held the scabbard upside down, the sword would slip out of the scabbard. Since ancient times, the long sword in the world had been called Chongyu. Qi Jiajie's intention in changing to this sword was obvious. There were millions of long swords in the world, but only one, Chongyu, was enough. As a result, Qi Jiajie and that northern Mang sword energy that he had changed his name to be close to yellow-green were known as Qi Shu Yellow Path, respectively viewed as the successors of Deng Taiye and Li Chuangong's successive sword gods. After Shenyuan Qingfeng, Qi Jiajie was ranked as one of the top 10 experts of Liang. His ranking was even higher than Chai Qingshan, who had returned to the Dongyue sword pool to assume the position of suzerain. What made Qi Jiajie even more famous was that the purple dress of Mount Hui, who was known for her loftiness and arrogance, had publicly said, "Mr. Qi's realm is 1 foot lower than mine, and when it comes to killing, I'm 10 feet lower than Mr. Qi's." This directly caused Qi Jiajie, who had not shown his sword for many years, to reach the peak of his reputation, vaguely gaining the status of the number 1 expert of the northern land in Jianghu. Seeing Mr. Qi come out in person, Gao Shilian and the others felt relieved. In the minds of these juniors in Jing who had heard the name Qi Jiajie since childhood, even if the sky fell, Mr. Qi would be able to hold it up with 1 sword. Although they had guessed that Mr. Qi's previous release and withdrawal of sword energy was mostly related to this unknown young master beside them. So what? There had always been a saying in Great Peace City that Mr. Qi's true strength was not in his current realm of the sword, but in how Mr. Qi's cultivation would be higher than yesterday's. Especially when Liu Baijie resigned from his post as Minister of War and left to take up his post elsewhere. Qi Jiajie had sent him off and even gifted his sword to him. Liu Baijie, the Tongxi sword immortal, smiled and said, "Maybe in less than 20 years, I won't even be worthy of being Mr. Qi's sword disciple." Qi Yanglong's knowledge, Tantanan's seal engraving, Qi Jiajie's swordsmanship, and now the chess skills of Liang's chess saint, Fan Zhongho. Of the millions of people in Great Peace City, who would not be proud? When the young master who had come with the book saw Qi Jiajie walk out, the two exchanged a look. Compared to the young man who had a leisurely attitude and always had the ability to find irrelevant details in the wind and waves, Gao Shiqing found to her shock that Mr. Qi had taken the famed sword from his waist for the first time and held it in his hand. At this time, a group of people quickly came from the east end of Escape Summer Town. Zhao Wenwei, who was young and lively, couldn't help but look over. There were 4 people in the group, men and women of all ages. He only had his eyes on one person. As they came closer, the youth could finally see the person's appearance and could not move his eyes away. It was a woman of the same age who had just started to show signs of being outstanding. Her face, which had some baby fat, was thinning. A beauty with an oval face floated out of the water. Her robes were as white as snow, and she carried a white scabbard long sword on her back. She also had a simple red sandalwood hairpin on her head. The hairpin was like a sword that flew through her hair. In this moment, Zhao Wenwei was mesmerized. The saying that there were beauties in books was a lie. How could they be as beautiful as the real woman outside the book? Everyone had their own eyes. Gao Shiqing's first eyes were on the handsome young master in green robes and holding a sword. She exclaimed, "Li Yibai of the Dongyue sword pool?" Li Yibai was not only famous in Liang Lake, but also in Jiangnan and even in the officialdom of the capital. Li Yibai's teacher was Song Nianqing, the head of the Dongyue sword pool. His family was a distinguished family. In the past, the top 10 magnates of the spring and autumn period valued family status the most. except for the intermarriage of the 10 families. Even some of the imperial families who were not of orthodox birth disdained to form an alliance through marriage. However, the Li family that Li Yibai belonged to could become the next best marriage partner of the 10 magnates. In the spring and autumn period, there were only 8 families that received this honor: Li, Pei, Yu, and Xie. Among them, the Pei family fell into silence after the Shenzhou continent sank. The most famous person in the family was actually a woman, Pei Nanwei, the concubine of the old king of Jing, Zhao Heng. Li Yibai's temperament showed the gentleness and elegance of a noble young master in Liang. With a charming smile, he looked at Gao Shirlian and Gao Shiqing and said softly, "I didn't expect to meet Brother Gao and Miss Gao in the northwest, since it was Li Yibai who came from the Dongyue sword pool." Then the identity of the tall old man beside him was revealed. He was Chai Qingshan, one of the few great masters of the sword in the world. Presumably, Qi Jiajie's majestic sword qi that filled the small town had attracted this group of people. After Chai Qingshan entered the small town, he did not look at Qi Jiajie, who was at the same level, but at the young man holding the book. Li Yibai ignored the strange atmosphere under the eaves of the inn and introduced to the Gao siblings with a smile. "My martial uncle Chai was a good friend of the holy monk of the Dragon Tree in his early years. When he heard that the white-robed monk was going to preach at the Lotus Peak, he specially brought us to Beiliang. As for these 2 children, they are martial uncle Chai's beloved disciples, Song Tinglu and Shan Yi. What are you waiting for? Quickly call Brother Gao and Sister Gao." Chapter 1537. The handsome young man, who was not tall but had an extremely long sword on his waist, responded with an "Oh." He politely greeted Brother Gao and Sister Gao, and then continued to stare at his peer with vigilance. He was furious. "This guy wants to stick his eyes on my junior sister. What does he want to do? Does he want to take my sword?" Only when Song Tinglu looked at Zhao Wenwei did everyone notice that he was staring at the girl in white with a strange name. Zhao Wenwei's sister, Zhao Chunyuan, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Her silly brother, who only liked to read, practice, and paint with his father since he was a child, finally had his first awakening of love? Zhao Wenwei asked softly, "Your name is 321? The girl, who had long been accustomed to this kind of thing, said indifferently, "My surname is Shan. I'm not 321. Today, the girl in white simple and polite words were remembered by Zhao Wenwei, who would die of Wenjin in the future, for a lifetime. Song Tinglu snorted coldly, "Brat, don't try to get close to my junior sister. I can beat 100 weak scholars like you down without using my hands. When the time comes, beat me up. Don't say I didn't warn you." After such a commotion, the 3 boys and girls, each with their own thoughts, gathered under the eaves, which were slightly hostile after the strange young man and Qi Jiajie appeared one after another. Suddenly, the atmosphere relaxed a little. The scholar, who had just closed the book and tucked it under his armpit, suffered such an unexpected calamity for no reason. Not only was he not angry, he even smiled and gave the young Song Tinglu a thumbs up. The seemingly naive Zhao Wenwei said happily, "You know it even if I didn't warn you. You're also a scholar." Yin Chongging gently knocked on his brother-in-law's head and scolded, "Learning to read and write can't be used to argue." Standing under the stairs, Chai Qingshan looked at the young man under the eaves. His scholarly aura was not as good as Yin Chongging's, and his Jianghu aura was not as good as Li Yibai's. However, even Qi Jiajie and Qi Jiajie, 2 gurus, still couldn't suppress this person's potential momentum. Only Li Yibai, who had reached a high level in Jianghu, could slightly sense it. Yin Chongging, Gao Shirlian, and others were not Jianghu people after all. Shani suddenly asked curiously, "You have sword qi on you. Are you also a swordsman?" The man took out the book from under his armpit and waved it. He said with a smile, "Green Water Pavilion sword practice record of 60 years. Have you heard of this secret manual?" The girl nodded solemnly and said, "I've heard from my master that there are many swordsmanship manuals in the world, and the Green Water Pavilion has the reputation of being the best. It's a pity that the author's aptitude is limited and can't catch a glimpse of the scenery above the Shen finger level. Therefore, it only has momentum but not spirit." That person lamented, When I first used Green Water Pavilion to practice my swordsmanship, there was an old man who commented on this book, and it was similar to what you said. Chai Qingshan finally opened his mouth to speak. He said in a low voice, I didn't expect that the parting with Li Chungang by the Guangling River would be the last time I see him. That person put away the book again and said slowly, if it weren't for Great Master Chai's obstruction and the fact that he was not as skillful as he was, I and the old man in the sheepskin fur coat would have been able to walk up to the reviewing platform by the river. Chai Qingshan said expressionlessly, it's a matter of loyalty to the emperor. At that time Chai Qingshan, was a guest of the Spring Snow Building in Guangling. Of course, I had to stop Li Chungang. As for how I stopped him and whether it was honorable or not, I didn't care so much. Qi Jiajia's words were shocking. Lord Chai, is there a first-come, first-served rule? Chai Qingshan, who came from the southeast to the northwest this time, did not bring a long sword. The old man glanced at Qi Jiajia's sword, long sword, and did not speak. Yin Chongging gently held his wife Zhao Chuanyuan's hand to ease her tension. The person beside him was the northwest vassal king Su Fengyan. Zhao Chuanyuan was a socialite from a noble family in the capital. She had also heard countless legends about this person. He had traveled to Liang Lake twice, went to Beimang alone once, traveled to the West regions twice, and fought in Beiliang once. How many high and mighty masters in the world had died in the hands of this young man? Back then, Run Tu led the army and rode horses to Jianghu, trampling the courage of half of Jianghu. As for the son, he smashed the Liang River Lake, which had been flourishing with great difficulty, into a mess almost all by himself. Martial Emperor City had become a thing of the past. Yang Taisui died at the Iron Gate Pass. Catman Han Shengxian died suddenly. Song Nianqing died in a foreign land. Master Lu Hao suddenly disappeared. Xiaolingzhen of the Spring Invitation Cottage in Shishu died for no reason beside the Spring God Lake. Zhao Ningxian, the young genius of the Taoist master residence in Longhu Mountain, was beaten to the ground. Gao Shirlian and Han Xingyan swallowed subconsciously. They looked at each other and saw fear in each other's eyes. Even Gao Shiqing, who was not afraid of anything, quietly took a few steps back. Su Fengyan, who had rushed from Mount Wudong to the escaped summer town at the foot of the mountain, did not feel as if he was facing a great enemy when facing the two sword masters, Qi Jiajia and Chai Qingshan. He turned to look at the bloody battle on the other side of the street and turned back to look at Gao Shirlian, who was standing beside Yin Chongging. You are the son of Duke Yen, Gao Shizhi. My spy from Fushui mentioned that you would come to Mount Wudong with Qi Jiajia and the others. So when Qi Jiajia released his sword energy, I came. Other than telling Qi Jiajia not to do anything unnecessary, I also wanted to thank you. Gao Shirlian, do you still remember that martial addict Kong? He was a young man from Beiliang who went to Taiyan City earlier than Yen Qiji. Now he is working in the Ministry of War. I heard that when he first came to the capital he was bullied a lot. It was you, Gao Shirlian, who helped him. Later, Yen Qiji followed Yen Jieshi and Yen Donggu to the capital. You were also the first person from the capital to hang out with Yen Qiji. Gao Shirlian did not feel the slightest bit flattered. In fact, this duke's son even had the thought of killing himself. I, Kong Wuqi, and Yen Qiji felt like old friends at first sight. I have nothing to do with you, the Prince of Northern Liang. Please don't thank me. You, Su Fengyan, should just knock me out with one punch. Otherwise, when I return to the capital, rumors will spread all over the capital. Won't that bad-tempered father of mine break my legs? But Gao Shirlian sadly found that he only dared to listen and could not say a word. Qi Jiajia asked, Are you done? Su Fengyan shook his head and said, No hurry. It just so happens that I am waiting for someone here. What, are you going to stand up for Wang Yuanran and his group of playboys? But let me say this first. No matter how much trouble they make, it is still the same. For example, that Lu Chengfeng who sneaked into the capital from Hezhou, the grudges from his early years are in the past. Wang Yuanran, who fought with me at Juzhou Embassy in Taiyan City, is about the same. But if you, Qi Jiajia, intend to interfere, then their originally insignificant debt will be counted on you, the number one swordsman in the capital. Su Fengyan smiled for no reason. If we really want to calculate, there is indeed a debt between us. Qi Jiajie clenched the famous sword he had been with for more than 10 years. He was calm and composed. He laughed and said, "Let's do it together." The young man, Zhao Wenwei, clenched his fist and waved it quietly. Mr. Qi was indeed Mr. Qi. Even when facing one of the 4 grandmasters of martial arts, the king of Beiliang, he was not inferior in terms of speech, momentum, or the style of a master. Su Fengyan, who had his back to the inn and was facing the street, did not look sideways. He said softly, "Okay, then please draw your sword first."